Because they sell a brick, not a box.
Okay.
So I got real close too.
Okay, thank you.
I bet.
So we'll call the Rice Creek Board of Managers meeting of April 26, 2023, 9 a.m. We are at the Shoreview City Hall Council Chambers. And so I'll call this meeting to order. Roll call indicates that I can see that all 5 managers are present. And setting the agenda, are there any additions to the agenda, Mr. Administrator?
Manager Bradley, staff have no proposed adjustments to the agenda. I'll just make a note that we're having microphone issues, so we have let everybody know that, which is why we'll be utilizing different mics throughout the meeting. And then I'll make note of the Houston engineering task orders under the consent agenda, but we'll get to that. Thank you.
Does anyone else have adjustment? Here now, if I can have a motion then, accept the agenda.
I'll move.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none, passes 5-0. Next up is approval of the minutes, the April 10, 2023 workshop.
Mr. President, I move approval of the minutes as stated.
Second
that.
Okay, is there any discussion, any changes? Hearing none, I hear a motion, we've already a motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. Now we're up to the April 12th, 2023 regular meeting.
I'll move
Minutes.
approval of the minutes of April 12th.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. Finally, the April 17th, 2023 special workshop minutes.
I will move approval of the April 17th special workshop minutes as well.
Second?
Now, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. I assume there were no adjustments. We're up to the consent agenda. And Mr. Administrator, if you'd like to walk us through the consent agenda.
Sure. Manager Bradley, Board of Managers. First on the consent agenda, we do have 2 permits. I'll turn to Patrick Hughes if he has any adjustments.
Thanks, Nick. Board of Managers, yes, as Nick mentioned, 2 applications for consideration today. No proposed changes.
Does anyone have a question of Patrick?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the permit consent. Permit number 22-116, City of Columbia Heights, and permit number 23009, City of Lino Lakes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes. So we have a new little flip today. Let me explain that this was done at my request to speed up because we have a very full agenda. We have an additional consent item. If you discuss that, please.
That's correct, Manager Bradley, Board of Managers. On your agenda, you'll see that there are 3 Houston Engineering Task Orders, 2023, 04, 05, and 06. Those are found within your packet, ready for approval. And along with the staff memos in there, I would ask when the motion is made to please reference the task orders themselves as well as the table.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, if we could have a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve task order for the 2023 district-wide modeling program annual updates for the Ramsey County Ditch 1 Historical Review Technical Information for Public Drainage Proceedings and the Permit Program Compliance Audit.
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Passes 5-0. So we are now coming to the reason you're all here, which is ditch 10-22-32 evaluation of maintenance alternatives. Let me explain briefly how I hope to proceed. First of all, we're going to ask for a discussion from Tom Schmidt, who's our drainage ditch inspector, about the history of our work on this ditch. Next, we'll have Chris Adonis, who is our district engineer with Houston Engineering, who proposed alternative methods for repairing and maintaining this ditch. And then after that, we will open it up to people from the public who would like to speak. We understand we're going to have you at this end chair here. After that has been completed, and by the way, we at the dais here will have an opportunity to ask questions, both of our own staff and of the people who speak. Then we will give our staff an opportunity to respond if there's anything that needs response, and then we'll see if there's a reason to proceed at that point. So with that, I guess, Steve, you said you wanted to make a preliminary statement about your participation this morning.
Yes. After very considerable or careful research, I have decided not to recuse myself from this matter. I talked to Chuck and Lewis, our Watershed Council, at least 3 times to discuss what the process was I should use to decide whether to recuse myself and whether it was warranted. After my research, I contacted a private attorney who was an attorney for several watersheds, and his analysis was that he said I was under no obligation to recuse myself. I then contacted Lewis again to make sure he was comfortable with my decision and how I arrived at it. He thought I covered all the bases to make an informed decision. And I guess last but not least, I'm glad that I was able to come to that decision because I've been dealing with members on this ditch for 12 years from our community, and I just feel like I deserve to represent them at this point. So I'm glad I don't have to recuse myself. Thank you.
Mr. Administrator.
Yes, Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, just for the record, a couple of items, if I could, very quickly. As you know, we had a lot of people, a lot of interest in every time this was to come up on the agenda, and we moved forward to this. This is a public information meeting, and for the board and all who are here to hear the repair alternatives or the maintenance alternatives that Houston considered. I'll make note that some of the communications that have come to the district include terms that are in statute, and so we need to be careful about those and what they mean to us as a governing entity of the public drainage system. We'll also want to use care with the acronyms that come forth. To be clear, the district as drainage authority is not currently under drainage proceedings. This is a public information meeting where you're looking to receive interest and explain what's before the district as it considers its work. And I'll leave it at that. And if you'd like Tom to proceed.
Mr. Schmidt, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a prelude to the actual alternatives, I thought it'd be good to do some background information on the system and a brief history of the maintenance and management efforts we've gone through in the last 15, 16, 17 years. It seems can't be that long, but it is. Thank you, slide. So Anoka County Ditch 102232, or ACD 102232, which is what it will be referred to throughout, is a public drainage system, meaning it's owned by the people who own the property through which it passes. However, the district as drainage authority administers it on their behalf. Generally, it flows from southern Columbus south through Lino Lakes to Marshland Lake. The landscape north of Pine Street is especially flat. ACD 102232 engineers memorandum considers, analyzes, and recommends a maintenance approaches to try to maximize the function of the ditch and to address deficiencies that may be within the drainage system as part of a broader comprehensive drainage system management strategy, not just this ditch, but all of our drainage systems throughout the district. Next, please. So just some background on the records process for this ditch. In 2010, the district investigated historic drainage system records and ordered the consolidation of the ACD 10, ACD 22, and ACD 32 systems and records. They were separate ditches when they were constructed, sort of laid on top of each other over time. So as part of our process, we went through and consolidated them into one system, ACD 10, 22, 32. I know it's not much of an original name, but it's gets the job done. The as constructed and subsequently improved condition, also called ASIC, which is one of the acronyms that Nick was mentioning. You can also think of it as an as-built that was determined subsequently to records correction. Was not specifically identified because it was before the statute had been established for records reestablishment. And that would, John Cole, maybe you can help me out with the year that was, 2015, correct?
It was 2015, yes.
Thank you. However, the district did identify and utilize a functional alignment, dimension, and grade as part of a system management, both for the maintenance of the ditch and for permitting. The functional alignment and grade were used as an equivalency to the ASIC due to the heavily modified nature of the system. Next, please. So just a little bit of history, or initial history. District did a traditional repair project in 2012 south of Pine Street. The engineer had, which is HEI, Chris Otterness, prepared a functional alignment and profile based on the current alignment, on the existing alignment as it was on the landscape at the time, and prominent structures such as culverts and other items within the channels. The functional alignment and profile are no longer in use as the ASIC has been adopted. I'll get more to that. Go ahead, Chris. After subsequent repair activities, the historic bottom appeared to lower than the functional grade in some locations. This was primarily north of Pine Street because there had been less prior modification of the drainage system in this area. Next. Now we'll talk about the relationship of the ASIC, or the as constructed, subsequently improved condition, to the repair depth. The ASIC represents the maximum depth cross-section of a public drainage system repair. Sort of sets the maximum amount you can actually repair to. The Drainage Authority is not required to repair to the ASIC depth. Alternative repair depths are common in many parts of the state. RCWD's default is to repair and manage its its public drainage systems to the ASIC, but may utilize an alternative repair depth as circumstances dictate. Next, please. And some of the reasons why the Drainage Authority may elect for an alternative repair depth. Examples would include an equivalent drainage function can be provided with a shallower depth, and full repair is more costly, or full repair results in environmental impact, or full depth repair interferes with adjacent land use, such as irrigation. Many drainage authorities, including Rice Creek, take an active role in addressing and protecting landowner interests, resisting attempts to further regulate public drainage system activities. It is notable that current statute requires, or consideration of matters, a full depth repair cannot or is unlikely to be permitted or by a regulating agency or A full depth repair will result in regulatory delays that hinder the drainage authority ability to provide immediate relief. Those are additional reasons why you may not consider going to the full ASIC. Next, please. Just some notes on the system performance of 102232. The system was originally designed with grades ranging from 0% to 0.06%, which is 0 to 3 feet per mile, which is 0 to 0.3 degrees, if that is more picturable in your mind. The system was not designed to facilitate rapid runoff large events like rapid snow melt. The system, again, is very flat, which correlates well with the topography north of Pine Street. This makes sense, if you think about the landscape. If you've been up there, it's very little fall across that entire area. The ditch itself was designed for a 2-year storm event, and that limits the drainage authority's ability to go beyond that in repair, because the idea is to return it to its original function as it was designed. The design intention was to provide an outlet for surface water accumulation, not necessarily to drain the soil dry. Large rainfall and snow melt events exceed that design capacity, and change in intensity and frequency of extreme events. This year, for example, we're coming out of a drought for the last couple of years. We had lots of snow, and then we had a fast, late melt. Though we did have some attenuation because we had some melting over time earlier, but the last melt was very rapid. Luckily, we had very little frost, and that helped absorb some of that moisture. But the ditch was still high and ran high and still running high in many cases currently. Thank you, Chris. So sort of pre-Joe Durrell, which is the extension of Joe Durrell Avenue Street North, on the north of Pine Street, and heading to Carlos Avery Estates development. Pre that development, the conditions there were, topography was extremely flat, not conducive to natural surface flow. The ditch is the only surface water outlet in this area. Temporary flooding in this area was common prior to the development and the road extension. As noted in this communication from a local landowner to the Tim Fell at the Corps of Engineers, expressing their concern about the proposed development. Again, the topography is extremely flat and not conducive to natural drainage. As you can see on the slide, the person expressed concern that, or noted that temporary flooding is common in this area during periods of heavy rains and snow melt. So it's been an ongoing issue, just to demonstrate the ongoing issue of poor drainage in the area. Next, please. Just a few examples of some of the management and maintenance efforts that the district has undertaken up to now. We replaced failing culverts at Pine Street and 137th Avenue, which is actually really a driveway. That was in 2008 to 2009. Replaced failing field culverts. Addressed inefficiency and blockages in the open channel from Pine Street to 137th by cleaning the open channel. and then clean the open channel downstream from Pine Street. That was 2012 as part of the main repair. Restrictive flow through Joe Durrell Street was addressed through a second culvert at a lower elevation in 2012. There's no visible channel through the public water between 137th and Joe Durrell and upstream of Joe Durrell until 2013 to 2014 when we reconstructed the open channel under a DNR permit. Obstructions in the channel due to pipeline crossings, there's 2 of those. We've been coordinated with the pipeline company during ditch cleaning operations to ensure safely being able to clean over those pipelines. Frequent clogging of 137th Avenue, or that driveway culvert again, was addressed through an installation of a second culvert, half foot below the previous culvert, again under a DNR permit in 2015. Beaver dams is an ongoing, never-ending cycle of addressing that problem, as Ashley can attest to with me. So it's a quick summation of the, again, all this work was limited to the original profile or the ASIC. Or at the time it was done under the functional profile. Excuse me. Go ahead, Chris, please. Next slide. This is a map just showing those locations from I just previously mentioned. As we went through this year, we've seen locations where we replaced the culverts and lowered the culverts or installed them and did channel maintenance. Next. The outcome of those maintenance and management efforts led to accelerated system flow, numerous beaver dam removals, cleaning of the ditch, culvert replacements, and modifications. The as-constructed profile, or the as-built, if you will, has been adopted. Some culvert elevations are above the ASIC. Further modifications are subject to multiple regulations and regulatory agencies. Modifications may affect water levels in the immediate vicinity of the culverts, but are unlikely to carry very far upstream past the culverts. The flow has been accelerated, but the accelerated flow has not completely offset the increased volume and intensity of rainfall events. Excuse me. Current conditions would be substantially worse had Rice Creek not undertaken repairs and maintenance driven by the concerns of landowners. It's important to remember that the ASIC profile as built, if you will, has been adopted. Some culvert elevations are above the ASIC, as I noted, but modifications are subject to multiple regulations. This may affect water levels in the immediate vicinity of the culverts, but again, not likely to carry very far upstream. That's it for me. Now we'll have Chris do a presentation on the actual.
Before we do that, does anyone, board member, have a question of Tom Schmidt? If you'd proceed then, thank you.
Board of Managers, I'll just note that Chris is now going to speak about the evaluation of maintenance alternatives. This was the memo that he produced and we looked to have on the board meeting a couple of times and we had the interest for.
All right, members of the board and the public here. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the memorandum that we completed on behalf of the Rice Creek Watershed District. So the location that we're talking about, and as Tom already addressed, is this area of the public drainage system that's north of Pine Street. And again, today I'm specifically looking at that portion of the public drainage system that's referred to as the main trunk. That's the more westerly of the two branches that you see on the screen here that are north of Pine Street in that green box that we're showing here. So we were asked to begin this study on the basis of continued landowner concerns regarding the function of the drainage system, including the capacity and grade of the drainage system. So we had completed earlier in 2021 a field survey along the drainage system. That field survey indicated that there was relatively little sediment in the ditch. And again, keep in mind, as Tom indicated, that there have been a number of efforts to maintain the drainage system over the last 15 years. Several portions of the drainage system have been cleaned out multiple times now, and each time that they've been cleaned out, the contractor has excavated the sediment out to the bottom of the hard pan of the drainage system, meaning they dug out all of the loose organic sediments out of there, and when they dig down, they're hitting the original bottom of the ditch. We did find that from our survey that the culverts at 3 of the road crossings are higher than the as-built ditch grade. And when I say road crossings on here, I'm also including 137th, which Tom indicated earlier is not really a road crossing, but a driveway, but it does have that dual reference to it on maps as 137th. We also noted that maintenance over and near the pipeline crossings continue to be a concern. The district did an effort on the northern natural gas line crossing that is east of Jodrell Street to remove a very large beaver dam that had built up. And I believe this work was in 2021, if I recall correctly. That was very significant. There was over 2.5 feet of material that was removed over the top of that pipeline, which made a significant change in the drainage function upstream from that location. But it does continue to be a concern at these pipeline crossings because there continues to be beaver activity, which the district has been managing through trapping. So noting these conditions that we found in our survey, and based on discussions with staff and the Board of Managers, we proposed a study that would evaluate alternatives to drainage management to further restore drainage function. And again, the reason why we evaluate alternatives is we wanted to verify what the feasibility of these different management efforts would be from a regulatory standpoint, from a cost standpoint, and evaluate the effectiveness of that work, because we don't want to spend taxpayer dollars on efforts that would not result in a change of function. So we came up with a handful of different alternatives. The first alternative, as we do with any of these type of studies, is to evaluate the existing condition. This serves as a baseline for comparing other alternatives. So we always want to look at how are these alternatives, the other alternatives we look at, how are they going to change conditions compared to that existing condition. So we utilized Rice Creek's district-wide model in doing this, and we modified the model for each one of these alternatives. In the case of existing conditions, we made sure that the culverts that are included in the model were shown in the model at the surveyed elevations from our recent survey. We also assumed that the as-built grade in the ditch was the existing condition, that it is cleaned out, and that is consistent with what we've seen from our survey. We looked at a second alternative. This alternative was actually to try to take a look back in time to evaluate the condition of the drainage system prior to that clean out of the hump over the northern natural gas pipeline, that large beaver dam. And the purpose of doing this is to evaluate the magnitude of that previous maintenance effort and look at the potential impact if continued beaver activity exists there and is done so unabated. So we wanted to evaluate the importance of that continued management of the that activity there. So in this case, we did add a 2.5-foot hump back into the model to represent that condition that was existing prior to that clean out. Third alternative we took a look at is the permitted grade. And this is intended to represent the maximum extent of maintenance that could be completed without additional DNR regulatory approvals. Important to note that there are a couple of public waters that are located along this drainage system on either side of Jodrell Street. And the DNR does have regulatory jurisdiction over these public waters. And in some cases that regulatory jurisdiction pertains to the outlet of those drainage systems and elevation of the outlet of those public waters. So in this scenario, we looked at Pine Street and the lowering of that culvert to the as constructed grade. And we have that included in this alternative because Pine Street does not impact the public waters, and so it does not require DNR regulatory approval. We looked at, in this alternative, or modeled the lowering of the 137th Avenue culvert to the DNR permitted grade. Important to note there that the Rice Creek Watershed District in 2015 obtained a permit from the DNR to install a second culvert under this crossing. There's actually two of them now, and that second culvert was at a slightly lower elevation than the prior culvert that was there, and the DNR authorized a grade on the culvert via permit. We have found from our current survey that we have now that the culvert that was placed in there is now higher than that grade at which it was to be constructed. We feel that most likely that is due to frost heaving that has occurred since construction of that culvert. In this case, all other culverts would remain at the surveyed elevation that we have indicated. The fourth alternative we looked at is looking at the full ASIC. And again, the ASIC that we're using here, this term is essentially the as-built condition. And we use that term, the ACSIC, because it is something that is a statutory definition. But again, from here on out, I'll refer to that as the as-built grade. So in this case, we wanted to show what is that condition going to look like if the district, along with its partners, if we were able to accomplish a lowering of the culverts that are above that as constructed grade. So this would include Pine Street culvert, that 137th Avenue driveway culvert, and lowering of Jodrell Street. And all three of those, and again, in this alternative would be lowered to that as-built grade. And the fifth alternative we looked at was that as-built grade, and looking at inclusion of additional capacity under the roadways. So here the purpose is identify does the sizing of these culverts make a difference, and would a greater capacity in terms of size under each one of these crossings, is that going to significantly make a difference? So in this case, each one of those three culverts that I mentioned earlier would be lowered to that as-built grade. In addition, we added in this model an additional 24-inch culvert being added to all existing crossings, including the field crossings that are along the way in this part of the drainage system. So to be able to do this analysis, again, we utilized the district's district-wide model. This was a model that was developed from 2009 to 2011. It's been really the basis of Rice Creek watershed management decisions under a number of different programs and projects. We utilized this model and looked at two different rainfall events. The first of which was the 2-year rainfall. This again is a rainfall that would have a 50% chance of occurring in any given year. identified in this particular location that rainfall event would be 2.8 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. The purpose of including this rainfall in our analysis is that it represents roughly that design capacity of these agricultural drainage systems that were designed in the 1890s, at which time this system was constructed. Important to note that these drainage systems were not designed to handle 10-year or 100-year rainfall events. Their design capacity was much smaller than that. The other rainfall event that we evaluated was the 10-year rainfall event. This is a 10% chance of happening in any given year, or 4.2 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period. And the rationale for utilizing and looking at that rainfall event is that it represents typical municipal stormwater design. So stormwater, or storm sewer that is designed within a city, or municipal local streets very frequently are designed for that 2-year rainfall event, being able to have enough capacity to convey that flow. We did not look at a 100-year rainfall event within this report. The district has modeled the 100-year rainfall event for existing conditions. It does have mapping of that. It's something that it utilizes to manage its Rice Creek Watershed District rules. We took a look at that mapping that we had from existing conditions, and we found that in this vicinity, no structures are known to be within that 100-year floodplain. And really, that's what the 100-year rainfall event is typically used for, is to try to manage flooding with respect to structures on the landscape. And because the existing conditions does not impact those structures, there was not a need to look at that with regard to management alternatives.
Chris, if I could, sorry to
Sure.
interrupt. Back on the last slide, you made reference to the 10-year event, but then you were talking about the municipal road, and I'm pretty sure you said 2-year. But could you clarify the 10-year is for the local roads, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I apologize if I misspoke there. Yeah, 10-year is the typical storm water management design event that is utilized for storm sewer and roadways.
Thank you.
So I'm going to walk through some of the results of our report that we found, and we'll be looking at this table for the next few slides. And important to note on this table what these values in the table represent. And essentially, we're looking at the comparison between existing conditions and each one of the alternatives that we modeled. And what the values that we have in this table represent are that change that would occur compared to that existing condition in the peak flood event, or the highest water level for these two rainfall events, either in the upper table for the 2-year and the lower table for the 10-year. So I'll first focus the attention to those boxes that we have outlined in red on the tables. This is the comparison that we did in that pre-pipeline hump cleanout condition. Important to note that in the area that is upstream of both Jodrell and upstream of that northern natural gas pipeline, the very upstream end of the drainage system, the cleanout of that pre-pipeline hump had a considerable impact on the flood elevations for the 2-year and the 10-year rainfall event. For the 2-year rainfall event, upwards of 1.8 feet of change in peak water elevation. For the 10-year rainfall event, nearly 2 feet of change in that peak runoff event. And so very important that out of all the conditions that we looked at, this was the most impactful thing that could be done along this part of the drainage system. Next, we'll look at that permitted grade alternative that we completed. And I'll note that at Jodrell Street and at 137th Avenue, we do have a small amount of change that occurs in that peak flood elevation at those locations for that permitted grade alternative. But if we look closer to the area just upstream of Pine Street, we have over a 1 foot change in the peak water levels there by lowering that that Pine Street culvert. So that's also a fairly impactful change that can occur on the public drainage system to lower water levels, at least in that area just upstream of Pine Street. Also important to note, as you get further upstream, the impact of even that permitted grade alternative diminishes. And once you get north, or I should say northeast of that northern natural gas line crossing, there's essentially a zero change for that flood elevations due to that permitted grade alternative. Then what follows from that is that there's also very little change even if we go to that as constructed elevation and lowering all three of the culverts to that as built grade. That really does not make any difference in the flood elevations upstream of that northern natural gas line crossing at the upstream end of the drainage system. If you compare that permitted grade to the full as-built or as-constructed grade alternatives, you do see some change that could be accomplished by lowering Joe Drell Street and 137th further in terms of peak flood elevations for the 2 and the 10-year event. For that 2-year event, it changes it by about 0.7 feet or a little over 6 inches. For that 10-year rainfall event, it changes by 0.5 feet or a little less than 6 inches for that alternative. But important to note that those are, in the grand scheme of things, relatively minor changes that can occur compared to some of the other efforts that have been completed already by the district or the lowering of that Pine Street culvert. One other thing to note from this table is that there essentially is no change by adding additional capacity under Joe Drell Street or any of the other culverts when you compare that to the as constructed alternative when you're looking at Joe Drell Street. So again, essentially adding additional capacity to those culverts at Joe Drell or 137th or Pine Street, they really would not make any significant change going upstream in the flood elevations for either one of those events. I'll talk a little bit about regulatory considerations with regard to any of these alternatives that could be considered. Lowering the Pine Street culvert will require Wetland Conservation Act engagement. Rice Creek Watershed District is the local government unit for administering the Wetland Conservation Act. And it may require mitigation. We have not gone into detail in evaluating what the potential impacts would be and what kind of mitigation would be required, but it would be something that the district would have to engage in at least evaluating the potential for impact there. Lowering 137th Avenue culvert below that permitted elevation will require authorization from the DNR. DNR has indicated this in writing to the district, and important to know that will require regulatory approval from the DNR. Likewise, lowering Joe Drell Street culvert will require authorization from the DNR as well. They've commented on that as well. And in both cases, DNR has already stated their disagreement with lowering the levels here. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be permitted, but it does create challenges in permitting and the potential feasibility of acquiring those permits. Also important to note that continued maintenance of other portions of the system generally do not require additional regulatory engagement. So the district can continue to clean as it has been the other portions of the drainage system and manage those parts of the system without that kind of regulatory engagement. Also talk a little bit about the pipelines. It has been challenging in the past the coordination with those pipeline representatives to be able to complete some of this clean out. In some cases, it has hindered the ability and the extent with which the clean out efforts has occurred. However, the district has worked to clarify those responsibilities between Rice Creek Watershed District and the pipeline. This we feel will help facilitate responsiveness in this regard, and we have been able now to successfully clean out the ditch above those pipelines to that as constructed grade. A few considerations that the board may evaluate when it's looking at the value of these efforts, the cost and the feasibility. We're looking specifically at the Pine Street culvert. Doing work there to lower that culvert will significantly restore the drainage function, as we indicated in our analysis. The cost of that is roughly going to be in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. That's what we're estimating. And we do see that as being something that is feasible. Lowering the 137th Avenue culvert to that previously permitted DNR elevation will marginally lower peak water levels upstream. It's not going to make a significant difference in the use of those lands upstream, but it carries with it a fairly low cost, less than $5,000 we'd be estimating for that, perhaps significantly less than that even. And it's something that's feasible. Lowering Jodrell culverts to the as constructed grade also would marginally decrease the peak water elevations for some rainfall events, as we had indicated. Going below that compared to that permitted grade alternative, it could make a difference, in the order of like a half a foot just at the location of Jodrell Street. Again, that effect does not carry very far upstream. Important to note that when we look at the extent of the flood that occurs for those rainfall events, it generally occurs within the adjacent wetlands to the ditch there. And that change, that 6 inches or so of change that would occur between those two alternatives would not measurably change the flood extent on upstream properties, meaning that that flood is still going to be within the confines of that wetland or just outstream of it. It doesn't, that flood isn't going to be, the floodplain isn't going to be substantially reduced in terms of area beyond what it currently is today. The estimate of lowering those culverts is going to be something over $50,000. We don't have an accurate estimate of that. That's just a very rough estimate. Regulatory cost would be unknown. We have no way of knowing exactly how much effort it's going to take to obtain a regulatory approval, or even if that is feasible. And the mitigation cost is unknown at this time as well. And there could be mitigation required by DNR as a condition of permitting that if it is even permissible. Some of the conclusions we arrived to is that we do recommend the district continue to coordinate with the road authorities to lower the Pine Street culvert. We recommend that the 137th culvert be reset to that permitted grade. Again, that's a low-cost thing to make a small difference in the water levels upstream. Jodrell Street, in our determination, is not substantively obstructing the public drainage system and the function that the drainage system serves. The road authority may elect to lower or increase the capacity of culverts under the streets. Important to note that does require coordination with the Rice Creek, but at this time we see no reason that would be challenging to work through. And we do recommend that Rice Creek Watershed District continue that frequent inspection and maintenance of the pipeline crossings as it has done, including the beaver management in those areas. That is really one of the most important things we can do in this area to be able to have drainage occur in this area to the function that the drainage system was designed to be. And that's all I have right now. I can address any questions from the board at this time.
I have a few. Let me ask if others have questions first. Marcy?
Mr. Chair, could you pull the very first slide up that shows the entire drainage system? I think it was the one Tom was referring to. Yes. So just to clarify, that entire 102232 was consolidated in 2015. Is that what and in doing so, that meant that all the finances that were charged in each of those drainage systems was in one pot. So when we talk about the work in the northern section here, the payment for any work that occurs there is charged to the entire drainage system. And then the second question I have is, has the work that's been done previously in this drainage system been at the 60-40 proportions that we've had in some systems?
If I may, Mr. President, I think it's probably more appropriate that I answer Manager Wynant's question. So
introduce yourself to the audience.
thank you. John Kolb. I am the drainage attorney for the Watershed District. The consolidation of drainage systems, Anoka County Ditches 10, Anoka County Ditch 22, Anoka County Ditch 32, took place prior to 2015.
Okay.
I believe it was more likely around 2010 timeframe. And at that time, none of the systems had functional financial accounts. And so the part of the consolidation process included discovery and determination and adoption of functional alignments, profiles, capacities, those sorts of things. It also included the consideration of how future expenditures and construction and repair costs on the drainage system were going to be handled. And at that time, the board established, with the consent of the local municipalities, established a water management district for the watershed area of the newly consolidated drainage system. And within the construct of the water management district charge system, the board acknowledged that there was a historical, I'll just say, impediment created by a lack of maintenance and some of those sorts of things. And in the meantime, there were other regulatory requirements for wetland mitigation and those sorts of things. And so the board adopted, as a matter of policy, a process to allocate costs between the water management district charge and ad valorem taxes. And so when you talk about the 60-40, Manager Wynant, that's what we're addressing in that 60-40 split. The major repairs that occurred to the portions of ACD 102232 south of Pine Street were funded by the water management district charge throughout the entire watershed area of the consolidated system, and then a portion by the ad valorem tax. Future costs have been limited to ad valorem collected funds under the district's minor maintenance program. So if there was to be a major reconstruction of a portion of ACD 1022 north of Pine Street, as is being discussed today, the board would still have to make the decision about how it wanted to handle those costs. If it became a major reconstruction, the likely outcome would be, at least at the staff level, would be a recommendation to reinitiate the watershed management district charge for a percentage and allocate a percentage of those costs to the ad valorem.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Mike, I don't have questions, I have statements. Would you rather wait and have them at the
We'll do
end?
statements later.
Yep.
So, Chris, first of all, I received this morning information. You responded to the city of Lino Lakes, who had submitted in writing a number of questions. I just want to make sure that those questions and responses are part of this record. So I guess that's just a direction. Number two, can you tell us what the ditch bottom elevation would be at Jodrell under ASIC? You previously told me it was 898.5. Could you verify that for me?
Okay. I would say I don't have the information right in front of me right now. I would have to pull up and identify our profile that we have in
Okay.
order to check that.
So, in my old lawyer days, I used to say, would you accept that subject to check?
Yeah.
So, okay. And I assume you similarly can't tell me what the ASIC's elevation would be at the permitted location at 137th Avenue.
Correct. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Do you know whether or not the permitted elevation at 137th Avenue is higher than or lower than the ASIC at Jodrell?
I believe that it is higher. Yes,
And that's not the permitted, that's the ASIC's.
that's the ASIC.
So
yes.
even repairing it, we will always have, if you will, a pinch point at 137th Avenue because the A6 is higher at that point.
The permitted elevation of the culvert at 137th would be a little higher than what the ASIC elevation at Jodrell would be. So if the Jodrell culvert were lowered down to the ASIC without lowering the 137th culvert to the ASIC, the 137th culvert would still control for low water levels, very low water levels.
Thank you. Those are my only questions. John?
Mr. President,
Waller.
thank you. In the beginning of this meeting, the administrator very smartly reminded us to be careful about the acronyms used here. And I agree with him. That's an essential thing to keep in mind. And so when we talk about the ASIC, for example, there is an ASIC that has been adopted. That may not necessarily by uses of other alternatives here that use that term are correct. And I think that's important to recognize that alternative number 4, when it says full ASIC, the ASIC is the permitted grade, and we get confused in there. And so I think that's important to recognize. There may be plans, there may be records that showed at one time it was a different elevation, you know, but the ASIC has been adopted and does exist, and that's the permitted elevation, which includes the consideration of the Department of Natural Resources. This is permit and what they have to say. And the district doesn't have authority really to override the DNR. They make a big determination. The culvert at 137th Street is going to be lowered back to the permitted elevation because a frost heave has pushed it up. And I think that's important to note that the grade then, I believe from Jordell to 137th, when it's at the permitted elevation, those are permitted elevations, was all going to flow. But it doesn't necessarily mean, and that's why this terminology is confusing to me, that the ASIC and what may have been in the past, some considerations are not the ASIC. They're just plans.
Mr. Adonis, if I could ask you a clarifying question based on what Mr. Waller said, would you clarify whether or not alternative 4, which talks about the possibility of lowering it to the ASIC, would lower 137th below the current permitted level?
Correct. It would lower it below the current permitted elevation.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
I have a question about 137 Street. Did I hear you say that's a private crossing?
Yes, it's a driveway.
Okay.
If you look at maps, the driveway will have a label of 137th Avenue on it,
Right.
but functionally it's a driveway.
And it's part of the ditch system, though.
The driveway crosses the drainage system, but it's not a component of the drainage system.
So if that was lowered, is that the responsibility of the private property person, or is that the ditch system's responsibility?
Mr. Administrator. Thank you.
Manager Bradley, board managers, Manager Winant, the district's position on crossings is that the crosser is responsible for their crossing and having it align with the authorities the public drainage system or the public drainage authority has. However, there are situations where there's been past communications about the elevation that should be appropriate and such, and the sizing of culverts where the district has departed from that and participated in the payment of adjustments. To this culvert here, I won't speak specifically about how we would work that out, but we'd certainly look at the record and what was communicated to the landowner or the work that the district undertook on their behalf in the past.
Other questions? If not, at this point, I'm going to open it up to the public who's coming, and particularly I know that we've received communications from Mike Kettler of Sunday Engineering. And Mr. Kettler, would you like an opportunity to address us? Oh, thank you. I thought I met him. Thank you.
I wasn't trying to hide from you.
No.
But I am Mike Kettler. I'm a civil engineer with Sunday Engineering, and was asked by Perry Wagaman to study the alternatives developed by the district as they relate to his properties. He has about 140 acres, best described as the affected areas upstream of the Joe Drell Street crossing. A little bit of background, sorry if it's repetitive to some of you, but originally his property did not drain to the ditch that we're speaking about. His natural drainage was towards what is now the Joe Drell Street alignment, and it was only as a result of the Joe Drell Street construction that his drainage pattern changed to be directed to that existing ditch profile. Part of that Joe Drell Street construction was a requirement from the Corps to not impound water behind that roadway. It's been some time since that construction, but it was a pretty thorough analysis by the Corps. And his belief was, and I concur, that higher original culvert crossing of Joe Drell Street essentially conflicted with that Corps requirement of impounding water. It was essentially providing a pond behind the Joe Drell Street crossing, as was witnessed by significant flooding over a period of time on his property to his home, his structures, his septic, and a lot of other usable
Mike,
areas.
Can you pull your mic a little closer? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Swim I apologize.
Thank you.
I guess with that, I studied the alternatives. I thought Chris's swim model was great, very extensive, and provided a lot of information. And I understand, I realize the ditch is designed as a 2-year return period, and it is really flat. I hesitate to even call it a ditch. You're essentially ponding water behind a lot of culvert crossings, which are storm sewer crossings. I guess with that, I think it makes sense to provide in his model a 100-year storm event analysis. Like I said, I think it's a great model. He's got a lot of information in there. I think it would be very beneficial to plug in a 100-year storm event and see the relationship it would have to upstream flooding. I know for the 2-year and the 10-year return periods, there's not a lot of difference in high water elevations directly behind these culvert crossings. I just think that for a 100-year storm event, you would see that. And I would ask that you compare those flood elevations with some critical elevations on the Perry Wagaman property with respect to his building and structures and usable area, as he's essentially sitting in a landlocked area. And I think that makes it a little more relevant to provide a 100-year storm event for an analysis and not just general pipe sizing in the district, which is probably a 10-year storm event. If he's landlocked, I think that's an important piece. I guess in terms of a proposed solution, I think all the alternatives are very well played out. I think alternative 4, maybe with some amendments, as I just said, with the 100-year events, and essentially seeing what you could do with the Joe Drell Street crossing for a 100-year storm event to make that pipe large enough to not flood upstream structures. So maybe it's an amendment to alternative 4, or maybe it's an alternative 6. Maybe it's a 6 with the 100-year event, and then the lowering of Joe Drell Street. We feel not down to the ASIC grade, but in the spirit of the core permit, down to the original ditch bottom, to give him a condition that existed prior to the construction of Joe Drell Street, which is, I think, the intent of the core. So I think those additions to alternative 4, maybe called alternative 6, would be something that would be better suited for upstream flooding, as he has certainly witnessed quite a bit of it in recent years. I think that is generally an analysis of the concerns. Like I said, I thought the model was great. The report was very thorough, but I think those items should be part of it in consideration for Perry's property. Thanks.
So,
questions for me if that's part of it? Sure.
I do have a couple questions for you, if I could. Thank you first of all for participating and coming. We appreciate your input. The Corps was telling the city how it would build a road. Am I correct about that?
I believe the jurisdiction of the Corps was some conditions on how they would allow the street construction when it took place. And
my point is that we are here today to talk about how we're going to repair or maintain a ditch. Part of that is downstream to have effects on a particular road, which is working within the city. So we are not going to order the city in this proceeding to set culverts. That will occur when the city comes back to us with a permit to modify and go over. At that point, the city will come to us with a proposal, how large the culverts will be, what other efforts it's going to be, assuming we order them to do that. So if we were to adopt alternative 4, we would not, as part of this process today, determine what the city was going to do in its responsibility as the road authority. As the road authority, they would come to us with a proposed solution, which we would then review to make sure that they were not restricting the capacity of our ditch. John Colbert, if I got that right?
I think you do have it right, Mr. President, to the extent that the road authority has separate and independent authority and planning jurisdiction over actions that would be taken to ensure that in the construction of its roadways, it's not causing an adverse condition, number one, and two, to design that road and any hydraulic features of that road for the protection and integrity of both the roadway itself, the road base, and also that of the traveling public.
So similarly, it's my understanding that whether we use the 100-year flood event, 100-year rainfall event, isn't relevant to repair and maintaining the ditch. It's relevant to what the road authority is going to do with its culverts crossing our ditch. which again will be a separate proceeding. All of your information is horribly or terribly important, really important, whatever, to us in that capacity. But today, all we're trying to do is determine the elevation of a ditch and what we're going to do with that. And I asked Chris Otterness what the elevation of the alternate 4 was, which he accepted, subject to check, was 898.5, which was relevant because I'm looking at your drawing here, in which you had proposed it be at 897.5, 1 foot lower than alternative 4. Have you done any studies to determine what impact that 1 foot difference would really have?
No, we haven't. My intention wasn't to recreate Chris's model. We take his model as accurate, where we would just ask that he plug in some different elevations, some different storm events to his previously determined drainage areas.
When we walk out of here today, I don't think we're going to address your 100-year flood issue or the bridge issue, but I don't want you to think we've ignored you or that it will not be considered if we adopt alternative 4. That's the message I want to send to people. Are there further questions? If not, I thank you.
No, I don't have questions for him. I have follow-on comments on what he said, but if you're going to
That will be
at a different time, I'll
when and if we make a motion and we have a discussion on the motion, that would be the time for you to do that. So thank you very much.
For the time being, thank you.
Is there anyone else who wants to testify before us today? Mr. Wagaman, Perry Wagaman, please, if you would go over to the microphone.
I wasn't prepared to speak here today at all. That's why I asked the engineer to speak for me. But I heard a lot of things here today that make a lot of sense when you're talking about ditch cleaning. But what don't make any sense to me is, to start with, I lived in my home for 25 years prior to this road being constructed, and I had absolutely no flooding problems. The property worked out just perfect for me. The trees on my property that were killed by the flood were 40 to 50 years old. So there isn't much question. When they built the road, I became flooded. It killed the trees. It ruined my home. I came to White's Creek Watershed when they built the road, when they were putting the culvert in, and I told them that a neighbor had called me and told me that they were putting the culvert in 3 feet too high. And I came to Rice Creek Watershed and told them exactly that they were putting the culvert in 3 feet too high, and that I requested some help to take care of my flooding problem. And they promised to do that. They were going to do it, and they brought up cleaning ditch 1022-32. Well, I wanted understood that I didn't come to Rice Creek Watershed and ask them to clean ditch 1022-32. I didn't even know what the hell ditch 1032 was. So I asked them for help with my flooding. The fact that I hadn't been flooded before the road was built, and I was flooded after the road was built, and the culvert was 3 feet too high, it shouldn't take a genius to figure out what was causing me to be flooded. And it shouldn't take a 15 or 20-year ditch cleaning process to take care of that problem. I can't understand why anybody with an ounce of common sense couldn't go over there and lower the culvert to the as constructed condition that it was in the first, or it should have been. I wouldn't have been flooded. My property wouldn't be destroyed. My trees wouldn't be killed. This is a whole hell of a lot simpler than what this group is trying to make it. It was basic. I could have gone over there with a tractor and lowered it myself and saved the property. So that's number one thing that I wanted understood, that I didn't ask for any kind of ditch cleaning. I asked to have relief from the flooding. All right. The next thing I want understood is that some of the stuff you heard here today from these people is true. Some of it isn't. And there's one thing that really brings it out in a strong fashion, is the fact that they're expecting you to believe that it took them 15 years to figure out there was a beaver dam over the pipeline. It took them 15 years to figure out what a beaver dam looks like and clean it out. Now, what kind of sense does that make? First off, it was not a beaver dam. It was a 2.5-foot obstruction, and the obstruction was not a beaver dam. Just about any of you can tell what a beaver dam looks like to start with. But not only that, this beaver dam that they're talking about continued for a distance, I would say, of probably 100 feet, maybe 50 feet on each side of the pipeline. It wasn't a beaver dam. It was a long obstruction in the ditch. We're taking it out, and I'm only mentioning that as an example of how much you can believe the whole story you're hearing today. And I don't know if there's any questions for me. I'll sure as hell answer them.
Any questions?
Who wants to ask them?
Well, other than me, I'm not allowed to ask questions?
Pushing your luck. In terms of your representation here, you can ask a question as a manager, not as your
As a
dad's
manager.
son.
I'll hold my tongue for now.
I have just one more thing that I maybe didn't make clear enough. There's got to be some kind of a nefarious reason they didn't want to lower that culvert 3 feet. I have no idea what it is, but of all the meetings we've had and all the talk, I've asked that question and nobody seems to want to answer it. So I'm sorry if I talk too much.
Thank you for your participation.
Pardon me, I can't hear you.
Thank you for your participation.
Thank you for listening to me.
So the city sent us a letter on its position with regard to this. Is there a representative of the city who'd like to place that in the record for us, please?
Good evening, managers. My name is Kevin Bittner with Bolton and Menk Engineering, and I'm also the appointed consultant city engineer for the city of Columbus. And I did provide you a letter in regards to this discussion today. And I just want to reiterate that as a city, we are very supportive of activities that maintain the ditch systems within Columbus. They're very critical to the drainage of Columbus, as we've all know and have talked about through these proceedings. Columbus is a very flat community, and so maintaining these ditches is critical. In regards to the particular discussions of the alternatives that were evaluated from a technical perspective, and this was the information that I had in front of me in my evaluation, I gave support to alternative 4. But we also are open to considering other alternatives should other information come forward. So I just want to make that clear as well. In regards to, I did make a note in terms of the discussion here and the presentation. In regards to the statement that lowering Jodell culverts will not measurably change flood extent in the upstream properties. I would agree with that from the perspective of the model. When you're modeling events, whether it's a 2-year, 10-year, 100-year, whatever it is. I've done a lot of this modeling myself, just as a background. I spent 5 years at the Corps of Engineers doing a lot of this type of modeling, so very familiar with flooding and this kind of culvert and bridge crossing modeling. But in this perspective, I should say, and Mr. Wagaman made the point, when it comes to the event itself, yeah, I can see where the profiles may not change considerably based on the elevation of the culverts, but I think what we're really talking about is a problem with saturation levels after the event is over. Then these it acts less like a ditch. That point was made as well, and we're really talking about pools behind control structures, which are the culverts. And so I would say that these culverts play a very big part in controlling that saturation level, and lowering those to the ASEC elevation, I think, would be very beneficial for those long-term saturation levels after the event is over. And so that's my basic points at this point.
Anyone have any questions? Again, thank you for your
Thank you.
participation. Is there someone else from the audience who would like to speak?
Good morning. I'm Janet Hagland. I'm on the Columbus City Council. I'm also the appointed liaison to the Rice Creek Watershed on behalf of the council. And I was here earlier at an earlier meeting, and also was here at your workshop. And I have learned a tremendous amount. I also know that the Watershed District has done a lot of work trying to solve this problem. I think that the letter that Mr. Bittner presented reflects the position of the city well in terms of what our interests are. But I also have heard this morning that there's additional information and additional perspectives that may be considered, both presented by Mr. Wagaman's engineer and our own, and I think there's probably some additional information that may be forthcoming during your discussion. I would just add that it would be very reassuring to the city if that information was considered as part of the alternatives to be selected. You've done a tremendous amount of work trying to solve this problem. It's incredibly frustrating for us as a city to have residents have repeated flooding events and not get relief from that. So I think, you know, the excuse me, the attempts that have been tried so far has not solved the problem. It maybe has kept us ahead of the curve with the development and the increased pressure on the ditch system to handle the stormwater runoff, but it hasn't solved the problem. And so if it takes another meeting or two to look at alternative perspectives and additional information and incorporate that into your selection process, it would offer some relief and some assurance to us that we've really considered everything. Thank you.
Mr. Waller, you had a question?
And thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ms. Hegland, for talking about the information, because this morning I received this, as many of my board members did, this huge packet of information from Mr. Wagaman. And so now I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, Mr. Wagaman, did you wish to have this entered in the record? Do you wish to have this packet of information entered into the record today?
Definitely. I wanted to.
Would you please go to the mic and ask us to do that? So we get the formality of it out of the way, Perry.
Yeah. Oh, yes, would you put that in? But you have to go to the
All right.
Got too many rules. I thought you were glad to get rid of me out of here.
No.
Okay, yes, I would like that.
Mr.
I'll tell you what the deal was.
Mr. Wagaman, do you wish to have this pamphlet of information? I see it has about 10 attachments to it entered into the record in your letter.
Yes, please.
Of April 25th, 2023 to the board.
Yes, would you please enter that into the record? I produced that packet because I didn't think the board had the information they needed to vote on this. And the meeting we had Monday, I thought was for that. So I kind of at the last minute produced that so they have some kind of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's very clarifying.
So I would like to ask a clarifying question of Janet Hagland, if I could.
Oh, Janet.
Janet. So other than this material that we have in our hand, and other than the material we've already received from Mr. Kettler, what other information, is there additional information you think?
What I was referring to is the information that was presented by Sunday Engineering. I don't know what you have in your hand.
Well, so we have accepted the information from Sunday.
Right.
We've accepted everything that's come to us.
Yeah, and what I'm asking is that there were 5 alternative solutions that were outlined in the memo.
Right.
I don't know if the plan is to vote on those 5 today, but what would be reassuring to me as a council member and as the council's liaison is if the additional information was considered as part of the alternatives that you vote on, whether that's today or later.
Absolutely, it will be.
Okay.
That was the whole purpose of today's exercise, is to open up alternatives to the recommendations from Houston Engineering. And as Mr. Cutler suggested, to consider those, and my one vote, I believe most of those alternatives will be considered when it comes time to set the Joe Drell replacement culverts if we adopt alternative 4. So we first have to figure out if we're going to adopt alternative 4, and then we will have a proceeding with you as the city coming in as a permittee, asking for what you want to do in terms of putting in a culvert size, location, et cetera, which our engineers would then review in terms of our responsibilities as a ditch authority. So yes, it will all be considered.
Right. And what I heard from the Sunday engineer was considering that information as an alternative 6 or an alternative 4 with modification. So that was my understanding is right now there's 5 as written in the memo, and I don't know what the process is for considering an alternative 6 or an alternative 4 with modifications.
Marcy?
I think to clarify here, the additional considerations, as Mr. President had indicated, happens when we talk to the city about Jordell, and those would include doing some additional modeling on the 100-year flooding event, and let's see, you said something about Jordell at the bottom of the ditch instead of the 3 feet above it. Some discussion.
That would be decided whether, if you take, so I understand, so
Right.
this is what we had a discussion with Manager Waller. If you adopt alternative 4, you are adopting the ASIC that this board has previously approved as the goal.
Right.
But with the additional issues of what to do with Joe Drell's ability to pass water through there.
Right.
And the additional question of whether we will or will not be successful in getting the DNR to cooperate.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my understanding is that this is a public meeting to receive information, not necessarily make a redetermination at this time, but to receive information. And I want to make sure that the city has presented all the information they want at this time. So am I clear that when you said you've become aware of additional information, that you're satisfied that all the information that you've been aware of is now entered into the record?
That's correct.
Ms. Hagelin.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, it's as the administrator said at the beginning, we must be careful with the terminology.
Thank you for your participation.
You're welcome.
So, Administrator Tomczak.
Yes. Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, maybe now would be a good time to just quickly review a couple of those correspondence to date that we received. You had mentioned it earlier at the meeting and wanting to confirm them in the record. We received the Perry Wegman Sunday Engineering communication, which was in your packet. City of Columbus.
Oh, we got another speaker. I'm sorry. We have 3 more speakers. So, certainly. Before we proceed, then, I'm sorry. We did not even need to cut you off. Are there additional people who would like to speak to us? Go ahead, please. We'll take you one at a time. No. Thank you. You interrupted very timely. If you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah. My name is Roger Nace, and my address is 6636 141st Avenue Northeast in Columbus, Minnesota. And my property is adjacent to the Wagaman's property. Kind of his property is Kitty Corner, to the southeast of my property. We have 20 acres there adjacent to the Wagamans, and what I tried to share in the letter that we sent, and first I appreciate the invitation that we received from the Watershed with the letter to come and speak. Is that we see, and not every year, but on wet years, we see a flowage, we see flow current of water coming from the large pond at the Wagamans, and it flows into our property behind our pole barn, and then to the east of our pole barn, and then it can stay for a significant period of time. There's no place for it to drain to, so it sits there. And we have experienced probably about 10 mature trees that have died, and we've cut most of them down. There's a few that we haven't yet, but we have a concern that the water level could be higher on a worse year, or if it had more rain, and get up to our pole barn level, which isn't that much higher than the water level has been. And thus we've come in to share those concerns. And I have to say, I appreciate all the effort that you guys have put into this already. There certainly has been a lot more study here than I actually even realized. And I guess I think for a point of clarification, the water level reductions seen in the options presented, the units in those were feet? Okay, I just didn't see that on there. I thought I heard people say feet, but I just wanted to clarify that. If it was inches, I didn't think that was going to really make any difference in our problem. And the hump that's been discussed over the pipeline, that has been removed already, or is that a proposed removal?
It has been removed. That was removed a couple of years ago.
Okay. All right. Thanks for those clarifications. So the other item of note, at least from our perspective, is the property directly to the south of us. There were two 40-acre plots that were converted into commercial industrial property from residential property. So, and the reason I bring that up is because in the last request for conditional use permit, they talked about, I think there was permitted to allow 12 to 15 acres of the 30-acre plot that's directly adjacent to me changed or to be impervious. So they had 12 to 15 acres of that 30 acres that was going to be impervious, and then that was scheduled to flow into a pond, but that pond was at 904 to 906 in elevation, and the wetland delineation line is right around 905 to 906. So that pond is going to be full in the spring, and if we do get, or nearly full, and if we did get a large rain, our concern was the water would flow from that impervious surface and try to go, and would go towards the pond, but the pond would be full, and it would then spill over into our property and the Wagaman's property, and exasperate, I guess, the problem we're already seeing here. So I think that might be a future thing to keep in mind as we look at possibly having more water that could flow into that area. Just wanted to bring that up.
John Waller has a question if you'd like to ask.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, Roger. I would like a little clarification because you sent the map in the letter here, and where your property is located, a little bit more in relation to Wagaman's, and I understand that we're talking about this map would be the top be the north and the bottom be the south.
That is correct.
And so then when you're talking about impervious surfaces on other properties, you're talking of them to be below, which are not pictured on this map? This photograph, you don't have a picture of that on here, correct?
I
That's
I don't
okay.
have
I
a
just
copy of
wanna
it
make
in front of me, actually. So
It's your letter
can I
that you
see the
sent.
one
Yeah.
that possibly that the attorney is
Yeah.
looking at?
Yeah.
I should have brought
Just so,
Yeah, so the property is
yeah,
pictured
yeah.
on there.
Okay.
It is, if it is, if you see the red arrow and then you see kind of a section line there running north-south, there that cuts through that arrow. So that is the property line that to the right of that, to the east of that,
Would be where,
is where that would is where I'm talking about right
Right.
now, and that is been converted to commercial industrial. And so in that area and farther to the east of that still, that would be the property that would spill or could potentially spill water directly into this area that we're talking about.
and so to access your house, a person would go on 147th Street, would they not?
141st.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Forgive me. But, and that's to the east of this photographed also then.
That would be,
This
I would consider that to
41st.
the north of this photograph.
You just wanted to have a,
I should have included a bigger image, but if you go straight to the north, with north being the top of the page, you would hit 141st, and about 800 feet or 900 feet would be 141st from that location,
Okay.
straight north.
yeah. I just wanted to have an understanding of where you're situated here in relation to where the drainage ditch is.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Nace. Any other questions before he leaves?
I don't. I just want to conclude that Sherry and I both appreciate the opportunity to come and present our facts and at least be heard. It's always nice to be heard. And so you have a great day. Any questions for me?
Any further questions for him? Right now? Thank you again.
Yep,
We
thank
do
you.
have your material will be in our record.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And there were two other hands at least that wanted to talk. Come on up. Name and address, please.
Yeah, I'm Scott Robinson. I live at 8179 4th Avenue in Lino Lakes, which is directly south of all this. It may be common sense, but it might be a question for the attorney. I mean, drainage rights are property rights, and they give an intrinsic value to the property you own, I believe, right? I mean, so you're showing everything to Pine Street here, and I guess I have a question for, is there somebody from Lino Lakes? City of Lino Lakes here too? Well, just because you're talking about a culvert on Pine
Could you
Street.
put the map up again so you can see? Thank you. Okay, sorry.
Try to see. Well, the culvert at Pine Street you're talking about, either replacing, removing, raising, lowering, probably not removing. Is there a proposed size to that Columbus and Lino Lakes want to put in there?
Chris?
Yeah, Mr. President, they have not proposed anything to us for a replacement yet. For the purposes of our evaluation, we assume that we'd be either reinstalling the same pipe that is there or constructing a new one at the same size but lower elevation. I believe the current one is a 24-inch.
Correct. And that would go to the as constructed, subsequently improved level, or will it go to the official profile of the ditch? Because that's two different things in this body.
So there is no official profile here, but there is an as constructed, subsequently improved condition. That's what the drainage system, the Rice Creek Watershed District manages the maintenance to. So our alternatives that we looked at lowering that culvert at that location would be down to that as constructed condition, the as built condition at the bottom of the ditch.
Are you aware that there are areas in the watershed that the as-constructed subsequently improved level is not the official profile and is not the maintained level of the ditches?
So I'll note that there's been an extensive amount of private modification of the public drainage system throughout the system. And as Tom noted earlier, we identified a functional alignment and profile through the drainage system back when we did the original development of repair efforts back in 2011, 2012. And when we did that, we completed the lowering of culverts and the maintenance of the ditch to that functional profile, which for the purposes of the Rice Creek Watershed District now serves as that as constructed and subsequently improved condition for that area to the downstream area. Again, that was heavily modified over the years from what the original establishment of the drainage system was.
Correct, but there were surveys done of the ditch from, well, south of the center of section 6, which is a half-mile south of Pine Street, all the way down to the lake. There has been core samples done, and they know that the ditch was dug deeper at one time than what it's being maintained at now. And I guess my larger question is if the board decides to put in as constructed, subsequently approved upstream from us, what are the effects of that water coming down to me going to be when you're not going to go to the as constructed, subsequently approved level below us and through us? And it's not this board. I mean,
So,
these faces have changed over the years.
Mr. Robinson, we received those exact same questions from Lino Lakes, and we have responded to those in writing, and those are part of the record. But Chris, if you'd like to summarize that prior response.
Sure. So important to note that lowering the culvert will not change the volume of water that is getting downstream. The same volume of water will be going downstream regardless of what elevation the Pine Street culvert would be. There may be some minor change in the flow that occurs for certain rainfall events, but those changes will be minor. And again, from the management of the drainage system, the landowners have the right, and the drainage authority, or Rice Creek as the drainage authority has the right to manage to that as constructed elevation.
But your hands are tied by the Corps of Engineers and the DNR?
I think just to modify Mr. Otterness's comment, Mr. President, it'd be subject to regulation. You would have the authority to do that.
Yes, we are going to find out, I think.
Well, if you have your 10-year rain event, I know that our back fields are going to be flooded because the downstream culverts are not adequate enough to handle. If you put a 48-inch culvert or 224s on Pine Street, you're going to flood us. There's no way you can't, because we're downstream and our culverts are smaller than those culverts. I guess that's not a question, it's a statement.
Yeah, but and we'll be dealing with the size of the culverts as we proceed to actual implementation. And we've heard your testimony. I've heard our engineers saying we do not intend to make them larger at this time.
Right. But it is your testimony that you have done a study on downstream and you say we can take the water and we'll have no adverse effects.
We have done extensive modeling throughout the public drainage system. And again, when we evaluate the effects of these alternatives that we're looking at the effects on the area that is in the area of study that we're looking at. So we did not specifically look at modeled flood elevations for each one of the alternatives going all the way back downstream. But again, based on what we have done in studies of other areas on the drainage system, those effects of lowering a culvert at Pine Street compared to what the hydraulics are going to look like a mile or two downstream, the changes are minor.
Joel, you had your hand up?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So just to be clear, Scott, as I understand this, an ASIC already exists. We've voted on that and taken that in the board. And that's pretty much what is the permitted grade on 3, alternative 3. And we get confused with these
For
uses.
this, you're saying? For this project you're talking about
For
right
this,
now, not
yeah.
my farm, or not, yeah, okay.
Yours too. And the only culverts that they're talking about lowering is to that ASIC level. And now we're accepting information for the possibility that there may be some change to it. But at this time, that's what Chris is talking about. And when you asked him what size the culvert is, he's maintaining the same size culvert, but he is lowering it to the profile that's already been adopted by the board. Just to make that clear. Yes. These other alternatives that have the word ASIC in there are confusing, such as alternative 4, 5, or even 6, because they're not the ASIC. The ASIC is the one the board adopted.
Well, in a perfect world, you'd be able to say ASIC is the official profile and you maintain it at that and life will go on, but we can't. So.
Have you completed what you wanted to ask, please?
I guess I didn't get a good answer. I'd like to see if the board is going to take a position of lowering to ASIC or to try to do it, I'd like to see it district wide. I mean, put it down where it's been, where the ditches have been dug to. I mean, what's so wrong with that? We have the right. Does the watershed have the right to lower it to the A6 level? Of course you do. It's just if you want to pay the DNR off and pay the Corps off. That's what they want.
Obviously, those are issues that we can't decide how much you would be willing to spend today. You have to find out what it would cost before we can make that kind of decision.
We have all these studies.
Mr. President, just to, Scott, to repeat Mr. Kolb's words, subject to regulatory of the DNR and of the Corps. And under the current ASIC profile, that's why it's called the permitted profile, because those regulatory authorities have had their say, and this is what they're authorizing, no more.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, please. No, Mr. Wagner, you've had your time. We've got 2 more people. Name and address.
Good morning. My name is Ron Moss. I'm with Tatanka Real Estate Advisors. I have more of a comment versus a question, maybe in support of the last gentleman's conversation. Almost all of the discussion here today has been about the area north of Pine Street, and I'm representing a party whose property is just south of Pine Street. They have 80 acres. They'd like to sell their land. It was platted back in 1980 as Pine Oaks Addition. At the time, all the land was dry. Right now, a reasonable amount of it is wet, and I think it's related to this topic that we're having today. They would certainly like to sell. We have a potential buyer, even as that we're having discussions with, but it will have a great effect on what the value of that land is, if it's going to be dry or if it's going to be wet. And I think that back 15, 20 years ago, I think it was all dry. I think, is according to my client, I don't have actual knowledge of that. But I do just want to make the comment that I think these decisions will impact things just south, property owners just south of Pine Street as well. So I think that's all I have to say, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions?
Mr. President, do we have a little more description as to the location of this 80 acres?
I do have a map here.
I wish that entered in the record?
No, I just came because my client mentioned that there was a meeting about this today, so no. But anyways, this is Pine Street. If right here, this is the 80 acres, this yellow spot here, that is impacted by the decisions which you guys are considering today.
Is that 4th Avenue that's on the east side of it?
4th is right here.
Okay,
going
I'm
north
just
and
trying
south.
to figure out where you're
Yeah.
at.
Here's
what branch?
I'm sorry. So here's 4th, here's Main Street, this is Lake Street, and Pine Street.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for your participation.
All right, thank you.
Sir, I think there was one more hand back there.
I just have a question, if I can ask it.
Mr. Wagaman, you've participated already, but please make it quick.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Well, Mike, in listening here, I can see another 15 years going back and forth about cleaning this ditch. And I'm wondering then, if I have to wait 15 years with my property flooded to deal with the obvious reason for its flooding. That's the question.
Timetables will be determined at this moment by the DNR, I believe. So we will be, if we adopt alternative 4, that's where we're headed next.
Well, don't the Corps of Engineers have the authority to change that? They're the ones that permitted the...
I don't believe we're in a position to comment on that process at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I believe there was one other person who wanted to speak from the public. Hearing none, we'll close the public portion of this. And I will ask if anyone would like to make a motion at this time.
Mr. President,
Yes.
before that occurs, could I put a few things in context for the board to just
Certainly.
frame your decision making, if you're going to make any decisions or go in any certain direction today? We've heard a lot of comment today, and I think it's really important that the board receive all of that because it better informs any decision you have to make. It's important for the board to note, first of all, that you are seated today in a decision that you would be making today with regard to Anoka County Ditch 102232. You are making in your capacity as the drainage authority for that public drainage system. And as such, you're limited in what you can do. And what you've been presented with today from your engineer are a series of repair alternatives and the impact of any one of those repairs. So one of the things to consider is there's a threshold decision under the drainage code, a decision standard under the drainage code regarding repairs, and that is, are the repairs necessary and are they in the best interest of the landowners that utilize the drainage system for as an outlet for beneficial drainage. In that regard, I think one important consideration is the purposes for which Anoka County Ditches 102232, now a consolidated system, were originally constructed. The drainage system was not constructed to support industrial, commercial, residential development. The drainage system was constructed to support agricultural uses where those agricultural uses were made more possible or improved by the construction of the system. So when we listen today and we hear about a problem, I think it's fair to recognize that the problem is multifaceted and that you only have authority to address one portion of that problem, and that is the function of this drainage system. Not to fix a flooding problem that is caused by other things. That requires other proceedings and other regulatory approvals and perhaps petitioned requirements for projects and other actions, which are not in front of you. So what is in front of you is the condition of this public drainage system and how you would proceed to meet the maintenance obligation or maintenance requirements of this ditch. So again, we consider, are the repairs necessary? Well, we believe they probably are, given the fact that we have facts to indicate that there are known obstructions or impediments to the efficiency of this system. To that end, it's important to understand what constitutes a repair. Repair is defined in the drainage code, and it's defined as to restore as nearly as practicable the originally constructed or subsequently improved hydraulic efficiency. Now, we talk about a lot of acronyms and different descriptions of that, but it is the hydraulic efficiency. And so sizing of culverts matters. Grade lines of the ditch matter. Geometric configurations, the actual cross-section of the ditch, that matters. Those all contribute to hydraulic capacity. Now, this board has previously considered an abundance of data and information and analyses and has determined an as constructed or subsequently improved condition that included alignment, grade, configuration, the hydraulic capacity of culverts and crossings and the rest of it. And whether we consider those portions of the system that were determined by talking about a functional profile, the exact same process that found its way into statute in, actually it's 2013, I misspoke, not 2015, that found its way into statute in 2013 are the exact same processes that you used in determining official profile or as constructed hydraulic efficiency or capacity south of Pine Street, and then further modified with the using the statutory process. Again, same technical process, but now the different statutory process that resulted in the adoption of what we've been calling an ASIC north of Pine Street. And what that ASIC represents is the maximum extent to which you can reconstruct this ditch and still call it repair. If you exceed that by increasing hydraulic capacity, that's improvement. That can only be accomplished through a petitioned process. If you deepen the ditch beyond the ASIC as you've established it, that's an improvement. That requires a petitioned process. So when the engineer outlines option 4, repair to the ASIC, that is the maximum you can do. Just to be clear on that. Anything beyond that would constitute an improvement of the system and requires a separate petitioned process, and then also all of the other regulatory processes involved. Another consideration that the board must give is in any work on the ditch, including a repair, it must give proper consideration to the conservation of soil, water, wildlife, other natural resources. It has to incorporate concepts that are found in the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, which means if there is a less damaging alternative or a less impacting alternative environmentally, you are compelled to choose it, okay? And so, and courts have said that you are required as a drainage authority in the current environment, you know, back when these ditches were built, that regulatory environment didn't exist, but you are required to balance those regulatory requirements against your obligations of maintaining the drainage system. The courts have further said if a regulatory impediment prevents you from restoring to the ASIC, then it's the landowner's right that is impaired, and the landowners have the obligation to vindicate that right. So the landowners can't force the district to go head-to-head with the DNR in a fight over whether something should be approved, not approved. If you go and let's just say as a result of the proceedings that are going to culminate at some point in a repair decision, you decide you want to repair back to the ASIC, that does not end the story. That actually begins a whole separate process. Now you've got to go and say, can we get a permit to do that? And if a permit will not issue to do that, and that results in an impediment to the drainage rights of the individual landowners, you're not obligated to vindicate that right. The landowners are required because it's their right that needs to be vindicated. And so you may say today, we want to pursue option 4 and repair this to the ASIC, but you may be prevented from doing that because you can't get the regulatory approvals to do so. Further, when you're considering repair on one portion of the drainage system, it is not considered in isolation. And so this gets to Mr. Robinson's comment and the Lino Lakes comments and others. You have to look at what is the overall impact of that. So what you're trying to do actually is thread a needle here, which is very small. And you're trying to get to the point where you have provided or restored the most beneficial drainage in the greatest interest of all of those competing interests. So again, I don't envy you as a board having to make this decision, but I wanted to put that in context because when the public comment comes in and talks about a problem, you may not be able to solve that problem. You may be only able to address one aspect of that problem. And when we hear comments such as repair to the original ditch bottom, not the ASIC. Well, based on proceedings before this board and an analysis of an abundance of evidence, this board has decided that the weight of evidence indicates that the ASIC, the as constructed subsequently improved condition, adopted by the board, which at Joe Drell Street, Mr. President, if I'm not mistaken, you called out as 898.5, that is the original ditch bottom. Unless there is compelling evidence that's contrary to what you've previously considered that would show that your prior decision was palpably wrong. So we don't know that yet. We've got to now wade through additional information, which is fine. That's important. We want to make sure you get it right. But I just want to put that in context for both the board and for the public in order to manage expectations here about what this board can actually do in the proceedings that are before it today. And so hopefully that's helpful, and I'm open to any questions you might have if I've confused you and need to clarify it.
Mr. Kolb, as always, you've been extremely illuminating and very helpful. Is kind of what I've been trying to say from time to time to various witnesses, that will be done later. And so thank you for that. I would also say with regard to the information that we've not had a chance to review, which came in today, in my opinion, if we were to adopt alternative 4, that would not preclude us from further reviewing it, because what we're setting is a policy. As a matter of policy, this board wants to set it to the ASIC, which is the ditch bottom. And so that's how I think we can continue to move forward if that's what the board wants to do, without cutting off the ability to consider anything like this information that we've now received. But I do think we should cut off the inflow of information at this point. We've certainly met everyone's expectations, I hope, of due process. With that, I would ask, is there someone who would like to make a motion?
May I make a comment really quickly first?
Certainly.
Okay, from what I understand, we weren't asked to make any sort of legislative action here today. It was to hold this public information session to hear the feedback from the other parties, not to do something today. I think obviously we need to do something, but what I don't want to do is just do something to do it. Because to the point of our, attorney, there's cause and effect here too. I don't want to do one thing and then flood the Robinson property. I don't want to do one thing and then impede an 80-acre parcel from being sold and developed. That's not our job here. Here's what I do know. Government's not perfect, ever, as evidenced by this 2-hour public hearing on one item. We don't move fast. We don't always get it right. But what we do have to be really cautious of is, in this instance, looking at the 4, 5, potentially 6 options, alternatives that we've discussed today. Once you start involving layers and layers of government, it doesn't get any easier. So what I don't want to do is act, rashly and do something that would have not only a negative impact on what our objectives are, which quite honestly, we have not specifically identified what those objectives are. Is it to save the turtles? Because that's one of the emails we got. Is it to stop the flooding? That's the obvious thing. Is it to stop trees from dying? Is it to stop impeding development? We have to figure out what our objective is before we sit in here and attempt to make a decision. So if there's a motion made, there's no way I'm going to get on board with that, because I think that's irresponsible. And I mean, I'm not inferring that any in particular member here is irresponsible. I'm just saying, as a board action, it doesn't seem like the right thing to do. I perceive today as part of a process, just one of multiple steps in this process. So if that's not in alignment with what the rest of the board is thinking is appropriate, that is where I'm coming from.
Mr. Wallen.
So I appreciate
Mr. President,
time.
Manager Jess, I did not come here to make any decisions today except to accept the information. And I agree with the president that this is a cutoff for the information. Once we've accepted this information, well, I need a little time to ruminate over this, Perry, and the others that have been brought from Lionel Lakes and from Columbus. And so I would suggest that we just close the public meeting and move on.
Mr. Kolb.
And I'm trying to distill what I'm hearing from the dais, Mr. President and managers. So I think maybe the appropriate motion, if you were going to take an action today, would be to close the record related to the consideration of repair alternatives for this portion of ACD 102232, now that you've received the public comment, you've received the additional documentation, because otherwise we're going to be in a constant cycle of, I've got more to show you, I've got more to show you, I've got more to show you. So I think it may be beneficial at that level close the
I
the
will-
record.
I will make a motion that we close the record on additional information concerning the appropriate repair for ditch 102232. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that. We'll close the record.
Right. All
It's
in
no
favor?
more new information, correct, John?
Correct. And could I suggest a friendly amendment to the
Of
motion
course.
that it include an instruction to the engineer to review the additional information and provide a summary to the board of the relevance of that additional information on the consideration of repair alternatives?
So noted. And then after we've made that motion, we'll talk about timing.
I accept the additional information, language to the motion.
And receive Manager Wagaman's statements, which I think you promised him an opportunity to receive.
I had intended that if we had a motion and a second, then pursuant to Robert's Rules of Order, we would then allow each of us to make whatever comments we wanted. But we now basically have I hear three people saying they want to table this as we've discussed. That's a majority, so that is, of course, what we will do. So is there anything you need to say on the record today or when we come back?
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I've had things to say through the whole thing, but
I know,
thought
but I was
wasn't
trying
allowed to speak.
because way we operate is we take evidence from witnesses, then we have a motion, and then we have a debate. And I took your comments as debate. Because clearly you shouldn't be a witness. If you're a witness, you can't be a judge.
So are we having debate, or are we going to cut off
Apparently not.
debate
We're cutting
now
off
because
debate.
we're not having a motion?
Right.
Then I have nothing to say.
Mr. President, is this the discussion period for the motion now?
Yes, for this motion.
Do you have some discussion you wish to
Not
add
on
as
the
a manager?
motion. Not on the motion. I'm fine.
Well, the motion is closing the record, Steve.
I
And-
understand
and
that.
So if, that's what
It's
this.
closing the record, but I have things to say about the issues, not about the motion.
Really?
And we're not discussing that apparently.
Well,
So-
I'm confused. I would assume that what you have to say has something that it should go in the record if it's not.
When apparently as the debate, not as a witness.
All right?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Mr. Administrator, I would hope that we could send these people home knowing what we were going to do. We can't do that. So when can we?
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, just to be clear for our participants, the public, I understood there to be a motion to close the material that's being submitted to the district.
We've already
and
had that.
Yep, receive everything, and you directed your engineer to review it and come back to you. With that, it kind of shifts to Chris and how much time he would need to go through these materials, the things that are in the packet, the folks that have spoken, et cetera. I would say let's a month, bring it back to a future workshop or such.
Well,
Or board meeting where you can take action
we
upon
can
it.
decide whether or not we need a workshop or if we just want to go to a board action.
My suggestion would be 30 days at least, and then as the schedule of your regular meetings allows.
Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yes, I do have one question on that process. The information being turned in is pretty much the opposite of what our engineer is saying, are very different from what our engineering is saying.
When you say our engineering, are you talking about?
I'm talking about our engineering for the watershed, Houston Engineering.
Okay.
Nothing against them, but our public engineer that was speaking for the people has a very different opinion and a lot of facts to back it up. And I don't understand why our engineer would be making the decisions on what is correct or not when we have one engineer saying one thing and another one saying another, and we have this engineer deciding what's right and what's wrong.
So neither engineer is going to decide what's right or what's wrong.
Who is?
Board is going to decide what is right or what's wrong.
Off of their information.
And your engineer has testified, and his information is in the record, so unless you're going to impeach your own witness, we're done with that.
I don't get that at all, but I don't understand. I'm confused, but.
Well, that was a lot of lawyerly language.
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, perhaps it's helpful. What I think we will see is that Houston Engineering, in review of all the information in the testimony, will have a very technically responsive position for you. There are other matters that maybe do not fall in that realm of being technically relevant, but there can be some general response to why it is or isn't, such as the 100-year being included or not. And obviously, these are past either drainage code limitations, if you will, or statutory limitations, or policy of the district as to how it manages the public drainage system. And so you can consider those, that feedback as well, and that I believe will address Manager Wagaman's concern.
Mr. President, the board is required to submit the information, I believe, to the engineer that's employed by the board. That's who we have. He's our individual. And but I want to remind the engineer and all of us on Mr. Kolb's statement that he made a few minutes ago. I know it was lengthy, but it was very detailed as to how the process works. In fact, I'm looking forward to reading it in the notes again because, and to consider that when we meet again to discuss this issue whenever the time comes. So I just think that we should approach it in that manner. Thank you.
So are we ready to move on to a new item on our agenda for today?
You ready for a vote?
I thought
We have a vote. We haven't had a vote yet on the motion.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, yeah, we had a vote. Yeah, that's right.
Voted 5-0.
Yes, it was 5-0. Yeah, make sure we have, well, that's good to check. There's nothing else.
That's always, that wouldn't be
Especially
the
with
first
this.
time. Thank you all for participating.
I have got to use the restroom.
Yeah,
I
Mr.
don't
Andrew.
care.
We're going to take a 5-minute break
Thank
here.
you. Thank you.
Literally, 5 minutes.
Ready to proceed.
All right, so
She's ready. We got a
thumbs up. Okay. I believe the next item is the
Open
aquatic
mic.
plant survey.
Open mic.
Open mic. Oh my goodness. Is there,
Oh, God.
is there anyone in the audience or on the
No.
phone who would like to speak to us on an item not on our agenda? Hearing none, we will now proceed then to the next item, Mr. Administrator.
Yes, Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, next on your agenda is Aquatic Plant Survey Services by Matt Koshin, here to share with you.
Matt, you're up.
Yes, members of the board, thank you for having me here today. Started the meeting very excited that everybody was here to hear about aquatic plant services and curly pondweed management, and no, very disappointed that the audience is left for that. Next time I'll have to get some extras to stand in for that. So yeah, members of the board, I have two items before you today. You can see them starting on page
68.
68, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, 62.
62.
62. Yep, two items back to back. I've got a short presentation here just to provide some information and background associated with both of these items, but I'll run through the slides on both items, and then there's multiple motions that go along with these.
Good.
First off, we have aquatic plant surveys. This is not something that the board has heard about before. Typically, this would have fallen under administrator-approved contracts, but with some changes there, you're hearing about it this year, so I get to tell you about this work that we've done. So the Rice Creek Watershed District does aquatic plant surveys as part of our regular water monitoring program. These aquatic plant surveys provide multiple functions depending on what they're doing. or depending on what our objectives are here for these different surveys. But this is field work that's being done on lakes. We're collecting aquatic plant samples at different points around the lake. Typically, we're using a rake to do that. You can see some of the photos here. This is us in the field throwing the rake, collecting these surveys. This is a pretty standard method that's done by other agencies, including DNR, conservation districts, other watershed districts, researchers at the U of M, so on and so forth. There's different types of surveys, and again, the different types of surveys serve different functions. So as a couple of examples here on the left is Silver Lake. This was a meandering plant survey that would typically be done to delineate invasive species. So that's one purpose that you might do a plant survey for, delineating invasive species for management. Another type on the right there would be what's called a point intercept survey. So it's a grid. You can see that those are set out ahead of time before you start the survey. Typically, that's more to assess long-term changes in overall health of the lake. Just a little bit more detail on each one of those. Meandering plant surveys, again, here's a couple of examples. Clear Lake on the left, Peltier Lake on the right. These meandering surveys are done to delineate invasive plants, often for treatment. So on the left, that particular treatment was for curly leaf pondweed on Clear Lake, and on the right, curly leaf pondweed on Peltier Lake, but the same type of survey is also used for Eurasian water milfoil. These surveys are required by the DNR in order to obtain a permit to do these types of treatments. So that's one type that we do. The other are these point intercept surveys. Again, these look like grids. The example I'm showing here is for Bald Eagle Lake. And this type of survey is used more to assess overall lake health and track changes over time. So, for example, Bald Eagle Lake pre and post alum treatment and some of the other projects that we did around Bald Eagle Lake, we saw a big increase in native vegetation and the number of different species of native vegetation on Bald Eagle Lake. We can see that with the increasing green dots there on the left, and then the size of the green dots indicates the number of species that were found. At the same time, the maps on the right show initially an increase kind of from 2014 to 2015 to 2016, an increase of Eurasian water milfoil following the alum treatment and the other projects on Bald Eagle Lake, and then a subsequent decline and nearly crash in Eurasian water milfoil. That's a pattern that we sometimes see in invasive species, is that they can respond very quickly to changes in water clarity, but then the long-term condition is something often different from that and lesser. So again, just touching on the high points here, we've been doing these surveys for many decades, actually. They have both a regulatory function to obtain permits, but also as part of our regular monitoring program to assess changes in overall lake health. This work is done by Rice Creek staff, so I do this. Partners that we work with, Ramsey Conservation District, Anoka Conservation District, the DNR, they do these as well, and so we're coordinating with these partners each year to figure out who's going to be doing what, who's covering which lakes, and then, of course, a consultant that we work with, and that's the nature of the motion that I'm seeking today, is to approve an agreement for this consulting. So beginning on page 65, you'll see a quote from Blue Water Science. We've been working with Mr. Steve McComas of Blue Water Science for actually longer than I've been with Rice Creek Watershed, so I think at least 20 years. I think the second photo on the right there, the person holding up the American lotus, which is kind of a rare plant, that's Steve McComas on Rondo Lake, in the northern part of our watershed. But just looking through this quote, you'd zero in on a couple of different key words like delineation or late summer PI. Those are the two different types of surveys that I talked about earlier. Delineation is a meandering survey to identify aquatic invasive species. A late summer PI is more of that point intercept survey for assessing change over time. So as I said, we've worked with Mr. McComas for many years doing these surveys. This is to support both our monitoring program, but also to obtain permits. And the next motion that we'd be moving on to, beginning on page 68, is directly related to this. So some of the services that Blue Water Science provides allows us to do the curly leaf pondweed management. And without these services, that program essentially would cease. So this is on page
64?
64.
Thank you. Yes, the motion. I also have it up here on the screen, but happy to answer any questions about this first item for aquatic plant surveys, if there are any.
Are there any questions on the first motion?
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions here. So we've been doing these for quite a long time, as you indicated, Matthew. So my second question is that since you have built this historic record, and you indicated that it's for more years than you've been here, so you've been here 15 or 16 years now. So what is it that from that record that you've been able to determine your evaluation, your status, how this goes on these lakes? Can you give us a little color on this, on how you use this record?
Sure. Yeah, Manager Waller, I could give you some examples. Bald Eagle Lake was one example where we've seen a profound change in the aquatic plant community following some major management actions. That was part of a publication that was put together following a lot of those projects. So that was where we were able to detect some pretty significant changes following management actions that the district has done. Those changes included an increase in the distribution, so the area where we're finding them, and the number of species of native plants in Bald Eagle Lake. And both of those are indicators of improving overall health of the lake, ecological health, and water quality of the lake. Perhaps a different example would be on Rochenau Lake, where we've been doing curly leaf pondweed management for many years, again, prior to when I even came to the district. What we've seen there is a little bit of a rare example of curly leaf pondweed effectively being managed down to a point where we haven't done management now for a number of years. There's not too many examples of that, I think, around Minnesota or in the literature at large. But because of the successful management that we've done there with curly leaf pondweed, we continue to do the surveys to see if it's coming back at all. But we haven't done management on Rochenau Lake now in 4 or 5 years, I think.
Well, that's very good news to hear, Mr. President. And then my next question for you and last one is that when I read over these list of lakes, and these are all the same actors or same individuals, but as you pointed out to me earlier today, that White Bear was a new addition to it, yet White Bear is a lake we always talk about. So I was hoping that we might see some additional lakes on your aquatic survey, such as and I'll give you some examples roughly here, Horseshoe, Onika, Sunset, and those are all in Washington County. I'm afraid I'm ignorant of what the additional ones would be in Anoka, but I know there are, and in Ramsey. And so that the historical record can begin to, for each one of these water bodies, so that you can tell whether you're making progress like you are in Rochenau or like you have in Bald Eagle, or whether you're losing. And so that's all. It's not a question for you to answer necessarily, just a comment. So thank you.
Manager Waller, if I may just make one comment back there. I think I mentioned earlier, but there are other partners throughout our watershed that also do aquatic plant surveys. So the list that we see here is not an exhaustive list of all of the lakes for which we have data. I take the point that you'd be supportive of additional data collection.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. That and you have access to those studies, and you keep a record of them, and so that you have more record than what you're just indicating here with this.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
And thank you for being able to come here and ask for this, because these questions get discussed and the public gets it. Otherwise, it'd be kind of behind the screen, and this is one of those things that I think it needs to be out.
Other questions?
No, I would make a motion.
Great.
Mr. Chair, I move to authorize the administrator to enter into a professional services agreement with Blue Water Science for aquatic plant surveys for an amount not to exceed $24,500. The administrator is authorized to issue contract amendments for an amount not to exceed 10% of the contract price, which was $2,450.
I will second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there discussion?
No.
I'm sorry. Aye. No, it passes. Thank you. Sorry.
And I can, Did you have something on this next one, or did you do
the curly leaf?
Yep, managers, yes, I do have a couple of slides
Okay,
on the curly
okay,
leaf pondweed
sorry.
also. I will go quickly. Curly leaf pondweed, an invasive species that the Watershed District has been managing for many years, but important to note, just like common carp, we don't manage curly leaf pondweed because it's an invasive species, but because of its link to water quality. So here's what it looks like, curly leaf pondweed, and then I'll get into the link to water quality. Potamogeton crispus is the scientific name, often because it gets kind of a crispy texture to it later in the summer. There's what it looks like. It's the only Potamogeton species that has a serrated edge on the leaf, so it's easy to identify. But what makes it unique and why there's a link to water quality is its unique life cycle. See if I can hide. How can I hide the thing on the bottom there? Well, I can't. I guess in the photo there that you're seeing on the lower right, it shows the unique life cycle of curly leaf pondweed. Basically, curly leaf starts growing late in the fall, survives under the ice, and then grows like crazy in the spring, often forming these dense mats, like the photo kind of on the lower left. But then it dies about midsummer. So this is not like native plants that would survive throughout the summer. It dies midsummer. And so this life cycle means that it's pulling nutrients out of the sediments in the bottom of the lake, building up all of this biomass, but then dying and decomposing in the heart of summer when algae blooms are more common. So releasing those nutrients into the water column, also causing a void in the bottom of the lake where aquatic plants would normally grow. And that means more resuspension of sediment and nutrients in the bottom of the lake and other factors there that contribute to algae blooms. So management of curly leaf pondweed consistent both with our watershed management plan and our aquatic invasive species policy. We've been doing this for at least the last 20 years. The management here has been by aquatic herbicides, not with harvesting. Earlier, there were some instances of doing harvesting on lakes that, for the most part, did not work well. I think most other areas around the lake where they've tried using harvesting, that's used more sparingly compared to herbicides. Important to note, this effort is a cost share with lake associations. So when we do this curly leaf pondweed management, we're thinking of this as a water quality cost share. So you'll see on page, well, actually it was, I have it here. I'm sorry, here it is. There it is. Here's a list of the lakes that are interested in cost sharing with us this year, at least potentially. What makes this work a little bit tricky is that we're in a time crunch every single year to get this work done. The ice goes out, you have to quickly do the survey, get the permit, line up the treatment, get quotes, and then the treatment needs to be done prior to water temperatures hitting 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That leaves us a very narrow window to do this management. So that means we're kind of in a rush every year. So we have to plan for kind of the worst case scenario in terms of budgeting and how much money we might spend. So what we're seeing here, the number on the lower left, that $41,760, that's essentially our worst case scenario. That's the money that we need to front ahead of time. But typically, as I laid out in the memo here on page 68, our actual costs are much, much lower because we don't end up, okay. I'll talk through the rest of the slides here. You're not going to miss too much, I promise. Typically, we don't end up partnering with all of those lake associations because they might choose not to do a treatment in a certain year, perhaps because there's not enough curly leaf pondweed there to treat, or simply because they don't have the money to cost share with us. But our actual costs after reimbursement from the DNR, if there are any applicable grants, which we do have some this year, and if they're the reimbursement from the lake associations, our actual costs are typically much, much lower. So this year, our actual costs would probably be in the $15,000 to $16,000 range. But the motion that you would be making on page 69 is for higher than that because we need to front the money.
So I have a question. In the past, you've been able to fund the Bald Eagle Area Association cost share match through leftover funds from the Water Management Association area fund, that money is expired by now, hasn't it? Or you still have some left over for that?
Yep, Manager Bradley, specific to Bald Eagle Lake, the water management district that was previously in place collected funds primarily for the alum treatment, which was done, but it also identified invasive species and specifically curly leaf pondweed management as an alternative thing to spend funds on. Now that the alum treatment is done, there are still some additional funds sitting in that dedicated fund that were collected and continue to be used as match funds for this work.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions? If not, I would, let's see, so we've got two motions you need here?
Yeah, I think they're two separate.
So I move to authorize the administrator to enter into cost share agreements with lake associations for curly leaf pondweed treatments in 2023.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. I move to authorize the administrator to enter into professional service agreements with Lake Management, Inc. for herbicide treatment of curly leaf pondweed with total contract cost not to exceed $42,000. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No opposed, pass. Mr. Administrator, I would like to move our agenda item to allow the city to come next.
All right. President Bradley, that would move us to the first item under discussion and information. That is the Columbus letter request for wetland credits based on the October 15th, 2009 memorandum of understanding. If I may, on April 6th, the city of Columbus, through its attorney, William Griffith, submitted a letter to the district, which I shared with you, looking for the district to reserve 3 wetland credits for future projects, including transportation and development projects in the city. The request is, as I stated, based on that MOU between a number of parties for a past event regarding the exchange of property and future development in the public drainage system. The letter requests that they would be able to come before you and support their position. I see that they're in the room here with you. So maybe I'll stop there.
Great. I think we need to hear from the city.
Where would you like it?
We've got because we have issues with our microphone, you can take the witness chair.
Incidentally, Board of Managers, these materials are on page 161 of your packet.
If you introduce yourself to us.
I'm looking at the clock, almost afternoon, so I'll be, I'll say good morning, but I'll be quick because it's almost afternoon and you've had a lot on your agenda. Mr. President, managers, my name is Bill Griffith. I'm the city attorney for the city of Columbus. And part of the reason I'm presenting is I had the good fortune to be involved in 2009 when all these matters kind of moved very quickly through 5 agencies. Elizabeth Mersko is here, our council members are here, our mayor is here as well, and Jesse Preiner. And so we will be brief, but I want to be to the point because this is a matter that has kind of been on a back burner, if you will, for 14 years. It happened all very quickly one fall, and then the tail end has taken some time to get back to you. I'll say just briefly, there were 3 important public projects, and they're outlined in my letter and also the MOU. The County 83 overpass, the DNR's acquisition of the Steinke property, and the district's repair of the ACD 15 and JD 4 ditch, and it was an important project for the district and for the community. And when all those things got linked, and you can have your own private thoughts about how they all got linked, but they were linked. Elizabeth Mersko actually had the good idea of hiring a facilitator to get us all in a room and work things out, and that we did. And it was actually, I've been doing this for a number of years, and it was one of those moments that everybody kind of walked away happy with the result, because 3 projects then moved forward. There was a federal funding deadline that was really driving the county 83 overpass project, but all three important projects were able to move forward. Several times, and when you think about the MOU, I want you to also think that it is a short cover that sits on top of minutes that were taken of that meeting. Very good minutes taken by Beth Bartz, the facilitator. And so it's not just the MOU that kind of governs what happened that day, but the minutes are very well laid out. And so I'll refer to those in a couple points. One is Mel Mettler, who was then mayor, said we're not going to be able to work out every detail in time for this federal funding to be approved. So there's going to have to be a fair amount of good faith by all the parties as to what was discussed here today. He also expressed the city's interest in wetland credits that would be a result of the bank, I think it's called Brown's Preserve, if I'm not mistaken. And the city had an interest in those wetland credits because, as you know, we're a very wet community. Every time we do anything, turn around, we need credits to develop roads, develop economic development sites. And so that was acknowledged. Importantly, it was acknowledged by Doug Thomas, representing the Watershed District, in which he said, the credits help Rice Creek Watershed District offset some costs of its repair project, as well as provide the City of Columbus as they look, and the City of Forest Lake, as they look to future municipal projects where they may need to mitigate wetlands. So we all walked away with an understanding that at an appropriate point in the future, there would be credits reserved. Now, there wasn't time for a discussion about how much and when and you know how those are triggered. But there was good faith as we walked out of that room. I think Rhonda Sabreja said on behalf of the county, we're all operating since the lawyers aren't going to have 3 months to document this. We've got weeks really for these projects to move forward. We're all going to have to act in good faith as we leave this room to kind of fulfill the understandings that took place in that room. And it was clear from us, at least from the city's standpoint, that a reservation of wetland credits would be part of that bargain. Everybody got what they wanted as they left the room in terms of approvals. We checked in through our staff a couple years later. We checked in again in 2015. That's documented through an email exchange. The answer at that time was, well, we're in the process of establishing the bank and depositing the credits, and we understand the request, and we will act on it in an appropriate time. You know, no fault to anybody. I think as time goes on, we move on to other things and we focus on other matters. We again asked more recently, and the response said, well, the response was there's no specific agreement on this point. And guess what? I would agree that there's no specific written agreement that spells out exactly how these credits are going to be triggered, when they're going to be set aside. But there was a written understanding reflected in the minutes of that day, and an MOU that covered that. Now, the MOU covered what had to happen in the time frame between September and November to have those three important projects go forward. It didn't say that everything else that was discussed in that meeting is for naught or doesn't have any standing. And so we think it's important. We feel we have a good and strong working relationship with the district. That's not even at dispute here. That's not even in discussion. But we think it's important for that relationship that this commitment, we felt a commitment, this understanding be realized. And you can say, well, how did you get to 3 credits? We had to ask for something. Your staff said put it in writing. And so we think it's a fairly modest request given all that happened, the millions of dollars of projects that were entitled due to our cooperation. We think it's a rather modest request for a city that's underwater, as you know, literally, to have access to these credits. And, you know, we think an appropriate action might be to direct us to work with your staff to kind of now, in fact, formalize what couldn't be formalized in a matter of 6 weeks in 2009. So that's our request. We know you'll treat us fairly, as you always do, and we thank you for your time.
Mr. President. Go ahead.
So as an ex-lawyer, I have a couple concerns. Number one, we'll put aside the fact that the statute of frauds says that there is no agreement not in writing is void. Because I think what we're talking about now is creating, for the first time, a memorandum of understanding. And so my first concern is I'm having trouble finding consideration for us as a Rice Creek Watershed District. The second problem I have is I will not, at least as one vote, grant money from Rice Creek's taxpayers to benefit the economic development of a single city. I've been on record on this in the past. So it would be one thing, for example, if you came to us and said, you know, as a result of us willingly lowering the culvert on Jodrell, we're going to incur wetland mitigation responsibility and doesn't that seem like a legitimate thing for Rice Creek as a person who's concerned about flooding and drainage to be engaged in? And I'd probably say yes. One vote. But come to me and say, give me 3 credits so that we can get more tax dollars out of filling a wetland so we can have commercial business. That doesn't sound like something that Rice Creek Watershed District's general taxpayers should fund. So I think the idea of sitting down and talking about this is fair, but at least as one person on here, I'm going to be wanting to see this tied into our goals and objectives as a watershed district. Any other comments?
I do have a comment. I think that's an unfair representation of what happened. In my opinion, the way I understood it, they had one day or lose all the federal funding. And Columbus could have just said, no, I want it in writing. And none of this would have happened. It would have I don't think any of the projects would have went forward if it wasn't for Columbus standing up and being willing to accept the good faith of the watershed. And I think that's a bad idea. And we were just talking a minute ago about signing a contract without knowing what was in it. And I think this is a good example maybe of why that shouldn't happen if that's the way we treat this. I think the city was crystal clear, and Pat Priner, our past president, every single time we talked about the credits from Browns Preserve, was very clear to say, remember that we have to reserve credits for the city of Columbus. And that's been said, I'll bet you 20 times in our workshops. And I just feel like if people can't trust us to keep our word, that's a bad road to go down, in my opinion.
So I will verify that I heard Pat Priner on one occasion say that.
Maybe.
I'm verified.
Yeah, I can.
Number 2, though, is we spent credits on ACD 15 and ACD 4, which lowered the cost of the project, which benefited directly the citizens by, I believe I also heard Pat say several times, $3 million. So they got a great deal out of this. They got the ditches they wanted. They got one of the 3 projects listed done at a $3 million savings to the citizens of that town and that area. So should we talk some more? Fine, but I have concerns.
Mr. President, listening to the gentleman there, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And I'm glad to know that Forest Lake has a claim for credits now. And we'll have to negotiate a contract with them too. And that's what it sounds like to me, is what I'm saying by his presentation. And so I'll just, yes. So I just want to point that out. It's been a long time. And specifically in your testimony today, 2 cities were mentioned, and Forest Lake is one. And there's been talk about, we had this discussion long before you're on the board, just over those credit issues, you know. And oftentimes at those days, since it was a new Forest Lake, was reminded. just to point that out. But I would say also that the district has, so for your information, we have probably a need for those credits under a contractual agreement we have that are remaining. And that's a very important point. I think that should be, the board should think about, because the amount of credits that are left in that bank are just about what we need to possibly meet that issue. And the issue here of those credits was was something that the board discussed amongst itself a long time ago when we were creating the bank. You know, there were several alternatives before we got to the bank. We couldn't get the fellows that owned the property on the Washington County side to sell us without going through a long legal process, and we didn't do that. So I just point out that those credits just aren't sitting there unused. There's probably a list, or at least one I know that would use a great deal of those credits, if not all of them.
Just want to make sure we're on the list.
So, well, I think the problem is that the credits will be used up before we get to Forest Lake or Columbus on the list.
Mr. Administrator.
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, a couple of statements that may be useful or important for the record. No doubt a meeting took place and discussion and the resulting MOU. My understanding of the agreement that the district had to obtain from the neighboring property owner, Mr. Hare, limited our ability or eliminated our ability to participate in the private market of wetland credits. How that plays out here is unknown to me, but I suspect if the city were saying we want to facilitate this development through the use of the credits, we'd probably be in violation of that. So we should look closely at those terms that we committed to there. General note was made in regards to the use of ad valorem funds, which funded a portion of this project. Certainly the ongoing maintenance that the district has for the wetland bank. And obviously there's a shift in perspective, if you will, through time. Now we're looking back. At that time, there was a belief that a wetland bank was a possibility. First and foremost, it was the functioning of the public drainage system to alleviate the challenges that existed on the property that later became a bank. So whether a bank would be realized and established, or if it would fail, or if the Corps of Engineers that we had to mitigate 14.5 acres of wetland credit and all those things weren't known looking into the MOU. So I think the point of bringing all that up is it's complicated, and I'll return to, no doubt a meeting took place and there's discussion, but there's a heck of a lot more detail now for the district to consider in trying to resolve of it. Some of those are obviously legal. I did exchange with Doug Thomas, the administrator at the time, who participated in it. His comment was the district did not commit to a specific number of credits or that the credits would be gifted. Again, this is just illuminating, if we do this, or excuse me, if the district does this, what are the terms? And those
do not exist.
Do not exist. So because of those things, I think staff should engage with legal in regards to certainly the agreement that we had with the neighboring property owner at a minimum.
Thank you for coming today.
Appreciate your time.
I thought you were talking to Nick. I was like, oh, all right. I do have a quick question. What is it that you need from us on this right now? Because I guess nothing, this was just receiving information. That's what it says on here, but there's been some confusion throughout the day what receiving information is versus action. So this is just us receiving this, correct? For further dialogue, it's going to show up on a workshop?
Correct. The letter was received, it was positioned, they asked, city asked for a chance to address the board. That's been given, and district staff would need direction from the board on whatever next step it as a collective, the single board would like us to do, if anything.
Is it time to go back to our regular agenda?
Yes. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for participating to be discussed further. Mr. Administrator, what's up?
Board of Managers, that would have us return to our items requiring board action. That would be number 3, the employee handbook. That is on page 75 of your packet. You'll recall this was an April 10th workshop item. You'll see on that page 75 of the packet, the, pardon me, the, here we go.
Yeah.
The 3 directions from the board at the workshop in sections 2.2, 5.1, and 6.4. Those adjustments have been made. Staff would like to, at this late time, offer one change to an additional section, which is 9.7. There it speaks to eligible employees, but it doesn't say what that is. And so consistent with the existing contract, and we can just add that language in.
Adding the link.
Defining consistent, eligible employees. It doesn't say what does that mean, and so that would be, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm prepared to make the motion, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Move the adoption of the Rice Creek Watershed District Employee Handbook with the proposed addition. Yes, and also to clarify that we have had much discussion about this in workshops and are
Second.
ready to approve.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, passes 5-0.
Who seconded that, please?
Steve did.
Manager Bradley, the next item on your agenda is Anoka, Washington Judicial Ditch 3, Branch 1, 2, and 4 bid consideration. Ashley's here to address that with you. That is found on page 122 of your packet.
Oh, boy.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Technically, good morning. Thank you, Administrator Tomczyk, Board of Managers. Yes, starting on page 122 is the memo. This item, I'll keep it pretty quick here. We've got a proposed resolution on page 129 is the resolution. Motion is on that memo page on page 122. This is to award the contract for the repair of Anoka, Washington Judicial Ditch 3, branches 1, 2, and 4 repair. This is phase 2. We had 8 bidders. 4 were deemed successful. Of the 4, the lowest one is JCON LLC in the amount of $244,454.30. The resolution does have a 10% contingency in there that the administrator would be able to sign off on. That's if something comes up in the field that needs to be addressed and it increases the cost a little bit. I'll keep it short. That's it. Questions?
So, Mr. President, I don't recall this name before. Hey, are they a new outfit or?
JCON?
Yeah.
They are not a new outfit. They're local to Vadnais Heights. We use them in our small contractor pool. So they've done work on other systems, as well as they are currently working with Houston Engineering on another one, I believe in Kanabec County. So.
Yeah, Mr. President, Manager Waller, yeah, we are working currently with a ditch project, actually a very similar type of work, including utilizing mats and that sort of thing, and they're performing as expected out there, so we have no concerns.
Thank you.
All right, can I have a motion? Mr.
Nope.
Yeah, Mr. President, I would move to offer resolution 2023-06 and its adoption.
Second?
All those in, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Oh, it's a roll call. Bradley, yes. Robertson,
Yes.
Wagaman,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Winant,
Yes.
passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Manager Bradley, next item on the agenda is number 5. That's your check register dated April 26, 2023, in the amount of, well, you know the drill. I'll see if there's a motion made. Page 132 is the actual register.
I would move approval of the check register dated from April 12th to April 26, 2023, in the amount of $318,936.21.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that takes us, I believe, staff reports?
That's correct.
Any comments on staff reports? They're wonderful.
I would just say, wow, once again, I mean, there is so much that the staff does that we never have an opportunity to dig into. So, congratulations to them.
Much appreciated. We'll pass that on.
Yes.
Next would be the May calendar.
Any comments on it?
Comments on the calendar?
Any concerns or whatever? Okay, it
I do have
is.
a quick question. I'm sorry. I know this
Sure.
meeting's been long, so I hate myself for asking a question, but would this be the time where we might consider holding an additional workshop to address the large elephant in the room that we were unable to address? Because I don't think that we're going to be able to navigate that in addition to other workshop agenda items. I think that might need
Well, and I don't think we.
and I could
we
be
may
wrong.
not be ready, might not be ready to do that on the.
Yes, I don't disagree with you, Manager Jess. I think we need a workshop on that, but I think we need to wait till we have the engineers have gone through the materials and let them come say, well, we're ready for the workshop and set it then.
That's totally fine. We can look at it for June then. That's fine. I just
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to
June.
mention that.
President Bradley?
Yep.
Just, excuse me, to confirm, which elephant in the room are we referring
Oh,
to?
well, just pick one.
I'm-
Pick one. A meeting for all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Oh, there was another elephant?
I don't think
Well,
so.
I think the
Wetland
wetland credit
credits.
issue might also be a hefty
Yeah, but
lift.
until we've sat down and talked about reasonable, what they actually are proposing and what they're willing to pay, whatever, hard to bring something to us.
I think there's a lot of waiting there.
Yeah.
To be continued.
Sorry I asked.
That's to be continued.
Comments on the calendar?
Oh, okay.
No
Anything left?
administrator
I think I've
update?
passed it. Anyone have anything they'd have to say?
No.
Oh, I do, man.
Okay.
you being
President
serious?
Yes, I want to wish today that today happens to be Administrator's Professional Day.
Okay, that's allowed.
And I want, since we're talking about all of the professionals that work for Rice Creek, this is their day. And so I wish them a happy Administrator's Professional Day. It's so important. It's on my railroad calendar. The BNSF doesn't celebrate it as a holiday, but they nevertheless note it.
Yes, Marcy.
Just quickly, the city-county meeting was fabulous, so thank you for those that participated in that, and so glad the CARP showed up. And then also, Metro Waters meeting was this past
Oh,
week.
that's true.
And there's some further discussion that we might have
Yeah.
about how the Metro watersheds can align to get some flooding support from the legislature.
Suggestion was working together or possibly hiring a lobbyist. And that's a to-do item.
Yeah. Don't want that to
No,
fall off the.
no, John, I thought you were in support of that, actually.
No, I'm in support of the group. There's a lot of talent there, and that talent lives in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
And the reason they hire lobbyists from when you live in the Red River Valley is because they don't live here, and we have access here. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. I think it. And besides, most of the work Mike, that is done for those kinds of things is not done during the legislative session when the lobbyist shows up. It's done during the summertime, during fundraisers and talking to the people that are in the legislature and getting them out there to see what your problem is. So that's done by individual members of the metropolitan group. Thank you. Sorry for being so long.
In keeping with this being the Administrator Profession Day, let's let them go to lunch.
Yes. Yeah, there we go.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor, aye.
Yay.
Thank you all for your participation and cooperation today. What do you need?